My bruised twin sister called my burner phone late on a Tuesday night, her voice shaking as she whispered that her husband was cheating and threatening to destroy her life. So we swapped places one last time. That night he stormed into the kitchen and barked, "Who the hell do you think you are? Do not you dare look me in the eye." He thought he was threatening his submissive, terrified wife. Instead, he picked a fight with a Special Forces intelligence operative. 5 minutes later, he was writhing on the cold marble floor. My name is Abigail, though everyone in my unit calls me Abby, and I am 33 years old. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my toxic family and a corrupt millionaire piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe bullies always get exactly what is coming to them. The rain was coming down in sheets when I pulled into the parking lot of a discreet rundown diner on the outskirts of Seattle. I was on a rare 2-week leave from my deployment, hoping for a quiet stretch of normalcy. That hope vanished the moment my phone rang. When you work in Army Civil Affairs and Intelligence, you develop a sixth sense for panic. Bethany sounded like a hostage when she begged me to meet her at a place where no one from her country club circle would ever go. I sat in a corner booth facing the door, my posture relaxed, but my eyes scanning every vehicle that turned off the highway. 10 minutes later, Bethany walked in. We are identical twins, but looking at her walking through that diner door, we could not have seemed more different. I was in dark denim tactical boots and a plain utility jacket. Bethany was wearing a trench coat that cost more than my first car, a silk scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, and oversized designer sunglasses that covered half her face, despite the gloomy weather outside. She slid into the booth across from me. Her hands were shaking so violently that the heavy diamond ring on her finger tapped against the laminate table. I did not ask how she was. I did not offer a warm greeting. My training kicked in immediately, assessing her rapid breathing and the rigid way she held her shoulders. "Take off the glasses, Bethany," I said quietly, keeping my voice perfectly level to project calm. She hesitated, her lower lip trembling. She looked around the empty diner as if expecting someone to jump out from the kitchen. Slowly, with terrifying reluctance, she reached up and pulled the sunglasses away from her face. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. The bruising around her left eye was severe. It was a vicious mosaic of deep purple, angry red, and sickly yellow swelling that extended down to her cheekbone. As a soldier, I have seen plenty of violence. I know exactly what kind of force it takes to leave a mark like that. This was not an accident. This was not a careless bump in the dark. This was a deliberate, calculated strike meant to cause maximum damage and maximum fear. "Trent did this," I stated. It was not a question. Bethany nodded, fresh tears spilling over her swollen cheek. She grabbed a paper napkin and held it to her face. "He came home furious last night. I made the mistake of confronting him. I found out he has been moving money into offshore accounts. I saw text messages on his tablet. He is having an affair with his bank loan officer. When I told him I wanted a divorce, he backed me into the hallway." She paused, taking a ragged breath. "He told me that if I ever tried to leave him or expose his secrets, he would frame me for financial fraud. He said he has been putting loans in my name. He told me he would leave me penniless, destroy my reputation, and make sure our parents never spoke to me again. Then he hit me. He told me I was nothing without his money." The mention of our parents sent a familiar bitter chill through my veins. Growing up, the dynamic in our household was crystal clear. Our parents, Barbara and Donald, were obsessed with wealth status and appearances. I was the rebellious disappointment. I preferred sports to pageants logic, to high society gossip, and military service to a corporate desk job. When I enlisted right out of high school, choosing what my mother called a masculine blue-collar life, they practically erased me from the family narrative. I was disowned, my name spoken only in hushed, embarrassed tones at their dinner parties. Bethany, however, was the ultimate golden child. She was compliant, sweet, and molded herself perfectly to their expectations. When she gave up her career as an elementary school teacher to marry Trent, a wealthy hedge fund executive, my parents treated it like the crowning achievement of their lives. Trent was their idol. He had money, connections, and power. "Did you call Mom and Dad?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Bethany let out a hollow, broken laugh. I went to their house this morning before coming here. Mom saw my face. Do you know what she said, Abby? She told me to put some ice on it and learn to be a better wife. Dad pulled me into his study and told me I was acting hysterical. He said Trent's investment firm is the primary backer for his new commercial real estate venture. Dad told me that if I cause a scandal and ruin his business funding, they will completely cut me off. They told me I would end up a disgraceful outcast just like you. I sat back in the booth, letting the reality of the situation wash over me. My parents were not just turning a blind eye to domestic violence. They were actively complicit in keeping their daughter trapped in an abusive marriage to secure their own financial interests. Trent knew this. He knew Bethany had absolutely nowhere to run. He had isolated her, weaponized her own family against her, and turned her life into a gilded cage. But Trent made one massive tactical error. He forgot about the outcast sister. I looked at Bethany. Her spirit was entirely broken. She was a civilian trapped behind enemy lines, and she needed a rescue extraction immediately. I reached across the table and took her shaking hands in my steady ones. "You are not going back to that house," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "I have to," she whispered frantically. "He said if I am not home by 6 o'clock, he is going to call his lawyers and start draining my personal accounts. He has my passport. He has my car keys. He has everything. I am going to get everything back," I told her. "But right now, you are going to disappear." I pulled out my secure military phone and sent a quick encrypted message to a trusted contact from my unit who lived in the area. Within 30 seconds, I had the confirmation I needed. "Here is the plan," I said, leaning forward. "My commanding officer has a secure cabin about 2 hours north of here. It is completely off the grid. No one from your country club world knows it exists. My squad mate is going to pick you up from the back of this diner in 10 minutes. You are going to go to that cabin, lock the doors, and sleep. You will not answer any calls, and you will not check your email." Bethany looked at me in sheer panic. "But Trent will kill me when he finds out I ran away. He will tear the city apart looking for me." "He is not going to look for you," I replied smoothly. "Because as far as Trent is concerned, you are going to be sitting right in his living room when he gets home." Bethany stared at me, her eyes widening as the realization dawned on her. "Abby, no. He is dangerous. He is out of his mind right now. You cannot go near him." "I am counting on it," I said. "We share the same face, Bethany. We have the same voice. We are exactly the same height. We swapped places to pass high school chemistry, and we are going to swap places tonight to save your life." She tried to protest, but I stood up and pulled her out of the booth. We walked to the diner restrooms, locking the main door behind us. I instructed her to take off the expensive trench coat, the designer blouse, and the tailored slacks. I stripped out of my tactical gear and handed her my comfortable, worn-in clothes. As she dressed in my heavy boots and jacket, I slipped into her restrictive, expensive garments. The fabric felt suffocating, a physical manifestation of the life she had been forced to live. Next came the most crucial part of the operation. I opened my tactical pack and pulled out a small mirror and a professional camouflage makeup kit. For years, I had used these paints to blend into hostile jungle and desert environments. Today, I was using them to paint a portrait of domestic abuse. I looked closely at Bethany's bruised eye, studying the exact pattern of the broken blood vessels. Then, turning to the mirror, I went to work on my own face. I blended the deep purples near the tear duct, added the sickly yellow around the cheekbone, and finished with a dusting of red near the brow line. When I turned back to Bethany, she gasped. Looking at me was like looking into a mirror. My squad mate texted that he was waiting in the alley. I hugged my sister fiercely, feeling how fragile she had become. "You are safe now," I promised her. "I am going to handle your husband." After ensuring she was safely in the extraction vehicle, I walked out into the pouring rain and got into her luxury SUV. The leather steering wheel felt cold under my hands. I drove toward the wealthy gated suburb that Trent and my sister called home. I treated the journey the same way I would approach entering a hostile combat zone. I mentally mapped the layout of the house based on Bethany's descriptions over the years. I visualized the entry points, the sight lines, and the environmental weapons available in a standard suburban kitchen. I pulled into the massive driveway just as the sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows over the manicured lawn. I parked the car, unlocked the heavy oak front door, and stepped inside. The house was dead quiet, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and sterile cleaning supplies. I walked into the sprawling gourmet kitchen, taking my position at the marble island. I did not turn on the lights. I stood there in the gathering darkness, my posture perfectly still, my breathing steady and controlled. I listened to the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was no longer the outcast daughter. I was the ghost of Trent's worst nightmare, waiting patiently in the shadows for the monster to come home. The heavy rumble of the garage door opening broke the silence of the house. I tracked the vibration through the floorboards, my body perfectly attuned to the shifting environment. A car engine cut out, followed by the dull metallic thud of a heavy luxury car door slamming shut. Footsteps echoed in the mudroom, erratic and heavy. He was stumbling. He was drunk. The door connecting the garage to the hallway swung open with unnecessary force, banging against the drywall. Trent stumbled inside, swearing loudly as he kicked off his leather loafers. The smell of aged bourbon and expensive cigars rolled into the kitchen long before he actually crossed the threshold. It was a suffocating, arrogant scent, the smell of a man who believed the entire world existed solely to serve his appetites. He rounded the corner and reached for the wall panel, flooding the sprawling gourmet kitchen with harsh, blinding light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I remained exactly where I was standing, motionless behind the massive marble island, my hands resting lightly by my sides. Trent stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes bloodshot and glassy, locked onto me. For a fraction of a second, confusion crossed his face. He was used to coming home to a terrified, cowering woman. He expected Bethany to be shrinking into a corner, crying, apologizing for whatever imaginary offense he had cooked up in his head during his drive home. He expected her to be covering her face, begging for forgiveness. Instead, he found me standing tall, my shoulders squared, my breathing perfectly regulated. The fake bruise I had painted on my face was a glaring target under the bright lights, but I wore it like war paint. "What is wrong with you?" Trent slurred his confusion rapidly, curdling into ugly, entitled rage. "Why are you standing in the dark like some kind of freak? I told you to have dinner ready by 8. I said nothing. My silence was a tactical choice. In interrogations, silence makes the arrogant uncomfortable. It forces them to fill the void, usually by revealing their true intentions or making a mistake. Trent took the bait. He marched toward me. His expensive suit wrinkled, his tie loosened around his neck. His face flushed a deep, angry red. He slammed his heavy briefcase onto the marble counter, the sound echoing sharply in the large room. "Are you deaf?" he spat, closing the distance between us. "I am talking to you, Bethany. You think because you cried to your pathetic parents today that you have some sort of power now? Your father practically begged me not to be mad at you. They know exactly how useless you are. You are nothing without me. You have nothing." He was trying to elicit a response, trying to find the submission he fed on. He stepped around the island, invading my personal space. The alcohol on his breath was overpowering now. He loomed over me, trying to use his height and weight to intimidate me. In the military, we call this posturing. It is what undisciplined combatants do right before they lose control. "Look at me when I am talking to you," he demanded, his voice escalating from a harsh whisper to a full-volume roar. I slowly tilted my head up and locked my eyes directly onto his. I did not show fear. I did not show anger. I showed him the absolute chilling emptiness of a predator calculating the exact weakest point of its prey. That single act of defiance snapped whatever thin thread of control he had left. His face twisted into a mask of pure, violent fury. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "Do not you dare look me in the eye." He drew his right arm back, his hand forming a tight fist. He telegraphed the strike by dropping his shoulder, shifting his weight to his back foot, and swinging wildly, aimed right at the fake bruise on my cheek. It was a sloppy civilian punch driven by ego and alcohol rather than mechanics. He expected a satisfying impact. He expected me to crumble to the floor weeping. He thought he was threatening his wife. I stepped inside his guard before his fist even reached the halfway point of its arc. The element of surprise is a soldier's greatest asset. I raised my left forearm, executing a brutal, bone-jarring block that deflected his wrist upward. The impact sent a shockwave up his arm, halting his momentum instantly. Trent let out a sharp gasp of shock, his eyes widening as his brain struggled to process why the fragile woman he had abused for years suddenly felt like a wall of solid steel. I did not give him time to recover. Combat is about overwhelming forward pressure. Using the momentum from his deflected punch, I grabbed his extended right wrist with my left hand, twisting it violently outward to lock the joint. At the same time, I drove the palm of my right hand directly upward, slamming it into his exposed right elbow. The sound in the kitchen was unmistakable. A loud, sickening pop echoed off the marble countertops as Trent's shoulder dislocated from its socket. A high-pitched, agonizing scream tore from his throat. The arrogance completely vanished from his face, replaced by absolute blinding agony. He stumbled backward, his knees buckling as the pain scrambled his nervous system. But I was not done. Leaving an enemy standing is a rookie mistake. I kept my iron grip on his twisted wrist, pulling him forward off balance. With a swift, calculated pivot, I swept my right leg behind his knees. I kicked his legs entirely out from under him. Trent went airborne for a fraction of a second before crashing down onto the unforgiving marble floor with a heavy, bone-rattling thud. All the breath was knocked out of his lungs in a sharp wheeze. Before he could even attempt to thrash or roll, I dropped down on top of him. I planted my knee squarely into the center of his chest, pinning him to the cold floor. I twisted his dislocated arm behind his back, applying just enough upward pressure to ensure that any sudden movement on his part would result in excruciating, blinding pain. Trent thrashed beneath me, gasping for air, tears of shock and agony springing to his eyes. His face was pressed hard against the expensive tile. "What are you doing?" he shrieked, his voice cracking into a pathetic, terrified whine. "Let me go! You broke my arm! You crazy psycho! Let me go!" I leaned down, placing my face inches from his ear. My breathing was completely calm, completely regulated, in eerie contrast to his hyperventilating panic. "If you move again, Trent," I whispered, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "I will separate the tendons in this shoulder permanently. You will never swing a golf club, hold a briefcase, or raise your hand to a woman ever again. Do you understand me?" He froze, instantly terrified by the cold, mechanical certainty in my voice. This was not the hysterical, weeping Bethany he knew. He was paralyzed by a fear he had never experienced in his entire privileged, sheltered life. He let out a pathetic, whimpering sob of surrender. As he lay perfectly still beneath my knee, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps, I noticed a glowing rectangle of light illuminating the dark space under the kitchen island cabinets. When Trent had crashed to the floor, his sleek smartphone had slipped out of his tailored suit pocket and slid a few feet across the marble. The screen was lit up brightly. He had not locked it before putting it in his pocket, likely too drunk to bother, or he was in the middle of a text conversation when he walked through the door. I kept my knee firmly planted on his chest, ensuring he could not move, and reached out with my free hand to drag the phone toward me. "You cannot look at that!" Trent gasped out, a fresh wave of panic replacing the physical pain. "Put that down. Bethany, I swear to God." I applied a millimeter of upward pressure to his dislocated shoulder. He instantly screamed and clamped his mouth shut, squeezing his eyes tightly closed in agony. I picked up the phone. The screen was glaringly bright. It was open to a messaging app. The contact name at the top read Courtney, accompanied by a little heart emoji. I remembered the name Bethany had given me at the diner. The bank loan officer, the mistress. I read the newest message that had just popped up on the screen, the notification banner sitting front and center. The $250,000 loan in Bethany's name just cleared. She will be ruined when you file the divorce papers on Friday. I stared at the words, letting the full weight of their meaning sink in. I read the previous messages in the thread, scrolling up with my thumb while holding Trent down. The picture painted by the text messages was devastatingly clear. Trent was not just having an affair. He was not just a violent, abusive coward who liked to beat his wife to feel powerful. He was executing a highly coordinated, deeply malicious financial assassination. He and Courtney had been working together for months. They had been secretly funneling his substantial assets into hidden offshore accounts to make it appear as though he had no money to split in a divorce settlement. Meanwhile, Courtney was using her position at the bank to push through massive fraudulent loans, using Bethany's stolen identity, forging my sister's signature on the paperwork. Trent's plan was brilliant in its cruelty. By Friday, he was going to serve Bethany with divorce papers. He would walk away with all his hidden wealth, while Bethany would be left completely destitute, crushed under hundreds of thousands of dollars of federal bank debt she had no idea she owed. She would face potential criminal charges for defaulting on loans she never took out. Her credit would be obliterated, her reputation ruined, and my parents, Barbara and Donald, would absolutely abandon her. They had already threatened to disown her if she ruined Donald's business funding. Trent had engineered a trap with no exit. He was going to throw her to the wolves, utterly destroyed and entirely alone. A cold, hard knot of absolute clarity formed in my chest. This was no longer just a rescue mission to extract my sister from a domestic abuser. This was not just about breaking a bully's arm and packing a suitcase. This was a financial war. Trent had weaponized money status and the banking system against my family. He thought he was playing chess against a naive, terrified former schoolteacher. He had no idea he had just handed the playbook directly to a military intelligence operative trained in dismantling hostile networks from the inside out. I looked down at Trent. He was sweating profusely, his face pale and contorted in pain against the tile. He was staring up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter confusion. He still thought I was Bethany. He still thought his wife had just experienced some kind of psychotic break. I locked the phone screen, slipping the device smoothly into the pocket of the designer jacket I was wearing. "Are you going to kill me?" Trent whimpered, a tear finally spilling over his eyelashes and tracking through the dust on the floor. I smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a soldier who had just secured the enemy's master battle plan. "No, Trent," I said softly, easing the pressure off his chest, just enough so he could breathe, but keeping the joint locked. "I am not going to kill you. That would be entirely too easy. We are going to go to the hospital now. We are going to get that shoulder fixed. And you are going to tell the doctors exactly what I tell you to say." I leaned in closer, letting the ice in my voice freeze the blood in his veins. "Because if you do not, I promise you tonight will be the best night of the rest of your rapidly collapsing life. Get up." I hauled Trent off the cold marble floor by the fabric of his ruined custom suit jacket, making sure to jostle his dislocated shoulder just enough to keep him compliant. He staggered to his feet, his face a sickening shade of gray, cradling his right arm tightly against his chest. He was hyperventilating, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I grabbed the keys to his luxury SUV from the entryway table and shoved him toward the garage door. The drive to the private emergency room in the neighboring affluent suburb was agonizingly silent for him and perfectly peaceful for me. He moaned with every bump in the road, sweating through his expensive clothes, trapped in a cage of his own ego. I drove with absolute military precision, keeping my eyes on the dark, rain-slicked roads while delivering my orders. I told him exactly what his story was going to be. He was going to walk into triage and say he tripped over a rug at the top of the stairs and caught his arm awkwardly in the banister on the way down. If he deviated from that script, if he even hinted to a single nurse that his terrified submissive wife had suddenly turned into a lethal weapon, I promised him I would casually hit the brakes and throw him against the dashboard. He nodded frantically, terrified of the woman sitting next to him. His pride simply would not allow him to tell the truth anyway. A powerful, arrogant hedge fund executive beaten effortlessly by his former schoolteacher wife was social suicide in his elitist circles. Pulling into the brightly lit emergency drop-off bay, I shifted gears both literally and metaphorically. The cold, calculating soldier vanished into the shadows of my mind. In her place, Bethany emerged. I became the panicked, devoted, overly emotional trophy wife he had trained her to be. I left the car running in the fire lane, sprinting through the automatic sliding doors and waving my arms in frantic desperation. I need help right now, I cried out, pitching my voice up an octave to mimic my sister's exact tone of distress. My husband fell down the stairs. Please, he is in terrible pain. Two triage nurses rushed out with a wheelchair, their faces masks of professional concern. I hovered over them like a nervous bird, fluttering my hands, touching Trent's uninjured shoulder and apologizing profusely for not catching him. Oh, sweetheart, I am so sorry. Just hold on. The doctors are right here. You are going to be okay. Trent glared at me from the wheelchair, his jaw locked so tight the muscles twitched. He was completely trapped in the narrative I had built for him. He had no choice but to play along as they wheeled him into a private, brightly lit trauma bay. The harsh fluorescent lights washed out his already pale complexion, making him look weak and pathetic. A young, no-nonsense attending physician walked in, pulling on a pair of blue latex gloves. Mr. Montgomery, the doctor said, examining the unnatural, jagged angle of Trent's arm. That looks like a severe anterior dislocation. Tell me exactly how this happened. Trent swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. He looked at me. I widened my eyes, bringing tears to the surface on command, playing the part of the traumatized witness to absolute perfection. I tripped Trent, ground out between his teeth, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. I missed a step at the top of our main staircase. I tried to catch myself on the heavy oak railing, but my arm twisted backward as I fell. The doctor nodded, making a note on a digital tablet. It is a very common injury for that specific kind of fall. You are incredibly lucky you did not break your neck or fracture your skull on the way down. I let out a dramatic trembling sob, burying my face in my hands. I told you we needed to replace that slick runner in the hallway, Trent. I was so scared. I thought you were going to die right there on the floor. Trent shot me a look of pure, unadulterated venom, but he forced a tight, agonizing nod for the doctor's benefit. It was just a stupid accident, Bethany. Just an accident. I am fine. The medical staff moved efficiently, administering a heavy dose of intravenous pain medication and muscle relaxants to prepare him for the reduction procedure. I stood in the corner of the room, my hands clasped anxiously over my mouth. But underneath the fake bruise painted on my cheek and the restrictive designer clothes I wore, my mind was running a cold tactical analysis. I monitored the exits, evaluated the medical equipment, and cataloged Trent's dropping heart rate on the monitor as the narcotics hit his bloodstream. The doctor grabbed Trent's arm and braced his own weight against the hospital bed. With a swift, brutal, and highly practiced motion, he snapped the shoulder back into the socket. The loud, wet pop echoed off the sterile tile walls. Trent let out a muffled roar, his body arching violently off the mattress, before collapsing back down, entirely spent. The nurses quickly stepped in to immobilize the arm, strapping it securely into a heavy-duty, reinforced medical sling that bound his arm tightly to his chest. You will need strict orthopedic follow-up within the week, the doctor advised, handing me a thick stack of discharge papers and prescription slips. He needs to keep that arm completely immobilized. No sudden movements, no lifting, no driving. He is going to need your help with basic daily tasks for a while. I nodded vigorously, wiping fake tears from my eyes and thanking the doctor profusely. I will take perfect care of him. I will not leave his side. I promise. The doctor and nurses finally stepped out of the room, pulling the heavy glass door shut behind them. The distinct click of the latch was like a starting gun. The frantic, weeping wife vanished instantly. I let my shoulders drop, my posture returning to the rigid, disciplined stance of an intelligence operative. The nervous energy melted away, replaced by absolute, chilling stillness. I walked slowly over to the side of the hospital bed. Trent was sweating profusely, the heavy narcotics making his eyes glassy and unfocused, but the pure hatred radiating from him was palpable. "You are completely insane," Trent hissed, his voice slurred but vicious in the quiet room. "You are a total psychopath. When I get out of here, I am going to destroy you. You are going to be locked in a padded cell for the rest of your miserable life." I did not raise my voice. I leaned over the bed, resting my hands lightly on the cold metal guardrail. I leaned in so close that my face was only inches from his. I could smell the sterile hospital alcohol mixing with his expensive cologne and the sour scent of his fear. I reached out with steady precision and grabbed the thick nylon strap of his medical sling resting across his collarbone. I pulled it, just a fraction of an inch, just enough to pull the freshly reset joint tight against the inflamed socket. Trent gasped sharply, his entire body going completely rigid. The color drained from his face again, leaving him chalk white. His eyes widened in absolute primal terror as a fresh spike of pain shot through his nervous system. "Are you listening to me, Trent?" I whispered, my voice completely flat, dead, and utterly devoid of emotion. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not going to destroy anyone. You are not going to lock anyone away. Because if you try to make a single move against Bethany, I will not just dislocate your shoulder again. I will systematically dismantle your entire existence." Trent stopped breathing. He stared at me, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked stutters. "I know about the offshore accounts," I continued, keeping my grip firm on the nylon strap. "I know about the fraudulent loans you took out in your wife's name, and I know all about Courtney." The mention of his mistress and the hidden money cut through the narcotic haze like a blade. He stared at me, his mind desperately trying to comprehend how his subservient, easily manipulated wife suddenly knew his most closely guarded, highly illegal secrets. He did not know he was looking at Abby. He thought the woman he had physically and financially abused for years had suddenly evolved into an apex predator right in front of him. How he choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic, terrified whisper. "How do you know about that?" I gave the strap of his sling another microscopic, calculated tug. He whimpered, squeezing his eyes tightly closed, unable to pull away from my grip. "You made a massive tactical error, Trent. You underestimated your wife. You thought because you could hit her, you could outsmart her. But you left your phone unlocked on the kitchen floor while you were busy screaming at me. And now I have everything. Every single text message, every wire transfer confirmation, every forged document you and your little bank loan officer cooked up in the dark." I let go of the sling and smoothed the fabric of my designer coat, stepping back to let him breathe. "You are going to play the role of the loving, accident-prone husband perfectly tonight. You are going to go along with whatever I say, because if you do not, I will forward that entire digital file to the federal authorities, the financial regulators, and the local police department before you even leave this hospital bed. I will hand them your head on a silver platter. You will trade your custom-tailored suits for an orange jumpsuit, and you will spend the next decade in a federal penitentiary, explaining to dangerous people why you cannot use your right arm." Trent stared up at me, completely and utterly broken. The physical pain of his shoulder was absolutely nothing compared to the psychological terror of realizing he was entirely trapped in a snare of his own design. He had built a fragile house of cards out of fraud and abuse, and I was holding the match. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as he processed the reality of his new existence. "Okay," he whispered, his voice shaking with defeat. "Okay. Bethany, please. I understand. Do not send the files." I smiled down at him. It was a cold, empty expression that made him flinch back against the hospital pillows. "Good boy. Now rest up and wipe that terrified look off your face. We are going to have company very soon. And you need to look your absolute best when my parents arrive." The heavy glass door to the trauma bay swung open with a sharp swoosh of pressurized air, breaking the tense silence of the hospital room. I did not need to turn around to know who had arrived. The overwhelming scent of expensive floral perfume and aged scotch announced my parents long before their voices did. Barbara and Donald swept into the sterile medical environment with the chaotic, entitled energy of people who believed the world was their personal waiting room. My mother, Barbara, rushed past me without a single glance in my direction. She was dressed in her standard evening attire, a tailored cashmere cardigan and pearls, her hair perfectly blown out despite the late hour. She made a direct line for the hospital bed, her face contorting into a mask of exaggerated theatrical distress. She threw her hands up, her jewelry clinking loudly in the quiet space, and leaned over the man who had just spent the evening terrorizing her actual daughter. "Oh, my poor sweet Trent," Barbara gasped, her voice dripping with a sickening level of maternal affection she had never once directed at me or Bethany. Look at you. Look at what happened. We came the absolute second we got the call. You must be in absolute agony, you poor thing." She hovered over his uninjured shoulder, gently patting his chest completely, ignoring the fact that I was standing less than 3 feet away. I remained perfectly still, observing the scene with the cold, detached eye of an intelligence operative analyzing enemy combatants. I stood directly under the harsh fluorescent lights. The fake bruise I had painted over my left eye was glaringly obvious. It was a massive, violent canvas of purple and yellow that covered half my face. A blind person could have sensed the trauma radiating from it. Barbara did not even look at it. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask how the accident happened or if I was hurt. Her entire universe was hyper-focused on the wealthy hedge fund executive occupying the hospital bed. Trent soaked up the attention like a sponge, with the heavy narcotics coursing through his veins and his mother-in-law stroking his ego. The terrified, broken coward I had pinned to the marble floor began to recede. In his place, the arrogant, manipulative abuser slowly started to claw his way back to the surface. He let out a weak, pathetic sigh, closing his eyes and playing the role of the brave, wounded martyr. "It was just a clumsy fall," Barbara Trent murmured, his voice slurred but purposely pitched to sound heroic. Bethany was so frightened. "I just feel terrible for scaring her. I am just glad I was the one who fell and not her." I had to actively suppress the physical urge to step forward and crush his windpipe. The level of psychological warfare he was employing was masterful in its sickness. He was securing his alliance with my parents, reminding them of his value and positioning himself as the noble protector. Donald was standing near the foot of the bed. My father was a man who wore his financial stress like a cheap cologne. He was red in the face, sweating slightly through his expensive golf polo, his jaw tight with poorly concealed anxiety. He finally looked at me. His eyes darted to the massive, colorful bruise on my face. He stared at it for exactly 2 seconds. I saw the recognition register in his pupils. I saw him process the violence written across his daughter's cheek. And then I saw him make the active, conscious decision to completely ignore it. Bethany Donald snapped his voice, a harsh, commanding bark that echoed off the tile walls. "Come here, now!" He did not wait for a response. He closed the distance between us, grabbed my upper arm with a bruising, aggressive grip, and physically dragged me out of the trauma bay. I let him pull me. My combat training screamed at me to break his wrist, to execute a joint lock, and drop him to the floor, just as I had done to Trent. I had to clench my fists and force my muscles to remain slack, playing the part of the submissive, terrified woman he expected his daughter to be. He hauled me into the busy, brightly lit hospital corridor, stopping near a row of vending machines where we were temporarily shielded from the view of the nurses' station. He released my arm and rounded on me, pointing a thick, angry finger inches from my face. "What the hell is wrong with you, Donald?" hissed his face, turning an ugly shade of crimson. "Can you not do a single thing right? Can you not just manage your own household without creating a massive disaster?" I kept my head slightly bowed, my eyes wide, playing the role. "He tripped on the stairs, Dad," I whispered, making my voice tremble perfectly. "I did not do anything." Donald let out a sharp, dismissive scoff. "I do not care how it happened. I care about what this means for me. Do you have any idea how much pressure I am under right now? My commercial real estate venture is hanging by a thread. We are bleeding capital, Bethany. Trent's investment firm is the only thing keeping us afloat. If he pulls his funding, your mother and I will lose everything. We will be bankrupt before the end of the fiscal quarter." He leaned in closer. The smell of scotch on his breath was nauseating. He looked directly at the fake bruise on my face, the absolute proof of domestic violence, and his eyes remained entirely dead to my suffering. "I do not want to hear any complaining from you," Donald growled, his voice a venomous, threatening whisper. "I do not want any tears. I do not want any drama. You are going to go back into that room and you are going to be the perfect, smiling, supportive wife. You are going to wait on him hand and foot. You will not stress him out. You will not cause problems. If you ruin this marriage and cost me my funding, I swear to you we will cut you off completely. You will be out on the street with absolutely nothing, just like your disgraceful sister. Do you understand me?" The sheer breathtaking toxicity of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. He knew Trent was beating his wife. He knew, and he absolutely did not care so long as the checks kept clearing. The betrayal I felt on Bethany's behalf was a physical ache in my chest. This was the trap she had been living in. A husband who beat her and parents who held her down so he could keep doing it. "I understand, Dad," I said softly, letting a single, perfectly timed tear slide down my cheek. "I will be good. I promise." He glared at me for 1 second longer, making sure I was properly cowed before smoothing the front of his polo shirt and adjusting his posture. "Clean your face up," he ordered dismissively. "You look like a mess." He turned on his heel and marched back into the trauma bay, ready to resume his role as the concerned, loving father-in-law. I took a deep, steadying breath in the hallway. I cataloged the layout of the hospital wing, noted the location of the security cameras, and mentally locked away every ounce of emotion. I wiped the tear from my face, carefully preserving the makeup of the bruise, and followed him back inside. When I re-entered the room, Barbara was already gathering her purse. "Well, the doctors say they are going to keep you here for another hour for observation before they discharge you," she was saying to Trent, her voice practically dripping with syrup. "Donald and I are going to run down to the cafeteria and get some coffees. We will be right back to help you get out to the car." "Take your time," Barbara Trent said smoothly, offering her a brave, pain-tight smile. "Bethany can sit with me until you get back." My parents nodded to him, completely ignoring me once again, and bustled out of the room. The heavy glass door swung shut behind them, sealing me inside the private bay with Trent. The moment my parents were out of earshot, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. The heavy dose of intravenous narcotics was working its magic on Trent's system. The pain was dulled, his inhibitions were lowered, and the unyielding support of his in-laws had completely repaired his fractured ego. The terrified man who had whimpered on the kitchen floor was gone. Trent turned his head slowly on the pillow. He looked at me, his glassy, bloodshot eyes narrowing into a look of absolute malicious triumph. He let out a low, breathy chuckle that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "You think you are so smart?" Trent sneered, his voice a raspy, venomous whisper. "You think because you got lucky and pulled some psycho martial arts move on me that you actually have the upper hand. You think those text messages are going to save you." I stood at the foot of the bed, my posture relaxed but vigilant. I did not speak. "You are nothing," Trent continued, his voice gaining strength, fueled by the drugs and his own staggering narcissism. "Your own parents just proved it. They would watch you bleed out on this floor if it meant I kept signing their checks. You have absolutely no one." He painfully shifted his weight on the mattress, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his immobilized shoulder. He locked his eyes onto mine, a wide, sinister smile spreading across his face. "While you were out in the hallway getting screamed at by your pathetic father, I asked the nurse to hand me my smartwatch from my personal belongings bag," Trent whispered, his smile turning into a cruel, triumphant sneer. "I sent a voice note to my legal team." The air in the room suddenly felt very cold. I kept my face blank, but my tactical mind immediately began racing, running through the threat matrices. "I told my lawyers that my wife has suffered a complete psychological breakdown," Trent said, savoring every single syllable. "I told them you violently attacked me in our home, causing severe bodily harm. I told them you are completely detached from reality, acting like a different person, and that you are an immediate danger to yourself and others." He let his head fall back against the pillows, letting out another drug-addled laugh. "My lawyers are filing the paperwork with a judge right now, Bethany. They are securing an emergency 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold. The moment we leave this hospital, an ambulance is going to be waiting at our house. They are going to strap you to a gurney, sedate you, and lock you in a secured psychiatric ward." My blood ran like ice water. A 72-hour involuntary hold. It was the perfect, terrifying counterattack. If they locked me in a psych ward under Bethany's name, they would confiscate all my personal belongings, including the phone with the evidence. I would have no access to the outside world. I would be drugged, monitored, and entirely discredited. And by the time the 72 hours were up, it would be Friday. The day Trent filed the divorce papers and dumped the fraudulent federal bank loans onto my sister's stolen identity. "You will not have your phone," Trent whispered, reading the realization on my face and glowing in his victory. "You will not have any proof. You will just be the crazy, violent wife screaming about conspiracies while they pump you full of tranquilizers. And by the time they let you out, you will be bankrupt, divorced, and facing federal charges for bank fraud." He turned his head to look at the digital clock mounted on the hospital wall. The red numbers glared brightly in the sterile room. "The paperwork will be signed by sunrise," Trent sneered, closing his eyes and letting the narcotics pull him down into a comfortable, victorious sleep. Tick-tock, Bethany. You have exactly 12 hours of freedom left. The digital clock on the wall shifted to the next minute, a silent testament to the ticking countdown Trent had just initiated. I did not break eye contact. I simply gave him a sharp, obedient nod, completely masking the tactical calculations accelerating in my mind. 12 hours until the sun rose, and a judge reviewed his emergency psychiatric hold request. 48 hours until Friday, the day he planned to drop the nuclear bomb of divorce and federal bank fraud on my sister. The timeline was brutally tight, but in special forces, a tight timeline is just an invitation to operate at maximum efficiency. My parents returned a few minutes later, clutching lukewarm cafeteria coffees and acting as if they had just survived a war zone. Barbara fussed over Trent's blankets while Donald nervously checked his phone, likely sweating over his fragile commercial real estate deal. The discharge process was a blur of signatures and fabricated smiles. I played the role of the exhausted, traumatized wife with Oscar-worthy precision. I guided Trent into the passenger seat of his luxury SUV, enduring his smug, drug-laced sneers the entire ride back to their sprawling suburban estate. When we finally arrived, Donald and Barbara helped Trent inside and immediately claimed the guest suites on the east wing of the house. They were exhausted from the inconvenience of caring about someone else for a few hours. I escorted Trent to the master bedroom, tucking him into the California king bed. The heavy narcotics had completely overpowered his adrenaline by now. Within 10 minutes, his eyes rolled back, and he fell into a deep, snoring stupor. The second his breathing evened out, the submissive wife vanished. I moved through the dark, silent house like a ghost. I retrieved Trent's smartphone from the pocket of my designer jacket. I bypassed the lock screen using the passcode I had observed him punch in earlier. I moved to the home office, a shrine to his massive ego filled with leather-bound books and expensive scotch, and booted up my own encrypted military-grade laptop. I connected his device to mine using a specialized data cloning cable I always carried in my tactical go bag. A progress bar illuminated my face in the dark room. I mirrored his entire digital existence. Every hidden email folder, every encrypted messaging app, every banking token, and every offshore routing number flowed into my secure hard drive. I scrubbed my digital footprint from his device, leaving absolutely no trace of the breach, and slipped the phone back onto his nightstand, exactly where he would expect to find it. I checked my watch. It was 4 in the morning. I had a 48-hour operational window before Friday's total financial annihilation. But the immediate threat was the psychiatric hold he had initiated. I needed to move fast, strike hard, and secure irrefutable evidence before men in white coats showed up at the front door to throw a straitjacket on me. I packed a small, nondescript duffel bag with my laptop, the cloned data, and a change of tactical clothes. I left a hastily scribbled, panicked-looking note on the kitchen counter, stating I had gone to the 24-hour pharmacy to get Trent's pain prescriptions filled. It was a plausible excuse that bought me a few crucial hours of daylight. Stepping out into the cool, damp morning air, I treated the affluent, manicured suburb as a hostile operational environment. In combat zones, you look for sniper nests, improvised explosive devices, and enemy patrols. Here in this gated community, the threats were different, but equally dangerous. I mapped the neighborhood watch cameras mounted on street lamps. I noted the blind spots between the massive, privacy-hedged properties. I cataloged the rotation schedules of the private security vehicles patrolling the winding streets. I navigated the luxury SUV through the neighborhood, keeping exactly to the speed limit, drawing absolutely zero attention to myself. I parked in the underground garage of a high-end commercial district in downtown Seattle. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled down the sun visor mirror. It was time to prepare the camouflage for my infiltration. I took a heavy, expensive foundation from Bethany's designer makeup bag and carefully, meticulously covered the fake bruise I had painted over my eye. I layered concealer and powder until my skin looked flawlessly smooth, perfectly mimicking how a terrified, abused wife in high society would expertly hide her shame from the public eye. I brushed my hair into a sleek, unassuming style. I adjusted the collar of the silk blouse and smoothed the wrinkles from the tailored trousers. I checked my posture, forcing my rigid, combat-ready shoulders to round forward slightly. I softened my jawline and practiced a look of mild, continuous anxiety. The psychology of wearing my sister's skin was complex. I had to project the aura of a woman who possessed immense wealth, but absolutely zero personal power. I had to look entitled enough to demand financial documents, but submissive enough to not raise any red flags with the bank's security protocols. The primary target was a fortress of glass and brushed steel located on the corner of the financial district. It was an exclusive private wealth management bank, the kind of institution that did not cater to ordinary citizens. You needed a minimum of 7 figures in liquid assets just to walk through the revolving doors. I gripped the leather handle of my designer purse, visualizing the objective. I needed the physical paper trail. I needed the loan applications containing Bethany's forged signatures to match against the digital offshore transfers I had just cloned from Trent's phone. I stepped out of the SUV and walked toward the towering glass doors. The air conditioning inside the lobby was freezing, carrying the distinct sterile scent of polished brass and expensive leather furniture. 2 armed security guards stood near the elevators, their eyes scanning the room. One of them gave me a cursory assessing glance. Identical genetics provided the ultimate skeleton key. Facial recognition, height, weight, bone structure, gait. I was indistinguishable from the woman Trent had married. The guard's eyes slid right past me, classifying me as a harmless, wealthy client. I walked across the vast marble floor, my heels clicking softly, and approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a polished woman in a crisp blazer, looked up from her dual monitors. Her customer service smile widened into genuine recognition the moment she saw my face. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said warmly, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous lobby. "Welcome back. We were not expecting you today. Is there something we can help you with?" I offered a strained, polite smile, allowing my hands to fidget nervously on the edge of the mahogany desk. "Good morning," I said, pitching my voice to match Bethany's soft, hesitant cadence. "I am so sorry to drop in unannounced. My husband was in a terrible accident last night. He had a severe fall and dislocated his shoulder. It has been incredibly stressful." The receptionist's face immediately fell into an expression of deep practiced sympathy. "Oh my goodness, Mrs. Montgomery. I am so terribly sorry to hear that. Please let Mr. Montgomery know that the entire branch sends their regards. Is he recovering well?" "He is resting." I lied smoothly, casting my eyes downward to sell the narrative of the overwhelmed spouse. But with him incapacitated, I realized I am completely in the dark about our current financial filings. He usually handles everything. With his injury, I need to make sure our household accounts are in order. I specifically need to review the paperwork for the recent loans opened in my name. I just need to verify the terms and ensure the automatic payments are properly structured while he is recovering. The receptionist nodded understandingly, completely buying the performance. A helpless, wealthy wife trying to manage the paperwork while her brilliant husband was injured was a story this bank probably saw every single day. "Of course, Mrs. Montgomery," she said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "We can absolutely help you with that. I just need to verify your identification for the access logs." I opened the designer purse and withdrew Bethany's gold-trimmed driver's license, which I had secured from her wallet before the swap. I handed it across the desk. The receptionist barely glanced at the photo before swiping it through a card reader. Next, she pushed a small digital keypad toward me. "Please enter your social security number and your private account PIN," she instructed gently. I punched in the 9 digits of Bethany's social security number, followed by the 4-digit PIN I had extracted from Trent's cloned data cache early that morning. The system chimed a pleasant, approving tone. The green light flashed. There was not a single red flag, no secondary security prompts, no hesitation from the system. I was in. Perfect, thank you. The receptionist smiled, handing the license back to me. If you will just take a seat in our private client lounge, I will have a loan officer bring the physical files directly to you. Would you care for some sparkling water or espresso while you wait? Just water, please, I replied softly, clutching my purse to my chest. Thank you for being so accommodating. I am just so overwhelmed today. Take all the time you need, she reassured me, gesturing toward a set of frosted glass doors down a quiet carpeted hallway. I walked down the corridor, the heavy doors sliding open automatically to reveal a luxurious, soundproofed lounge. I sat down on a white leather sofa, placing my bag carefully beside me. I maintained my anxious posture, but my eyes quickly scanned the room, locating the security cameras in the ceiling corners and mapping the emergency exit routes. I had successfully breached the perimeter. I was inside the vault of Trent's secrets. Now I just had to wait for the bank staff to hand-deliver the weapon that would utterly destroy him. I watched the frosted glass doors, ready to dissect every piece of paper they brought me. I needed the exact documents tying Bethany to the $250,000 Trent had stolen. A shadow appeared behind the frosted glass. The doors parted, and a young woman in a sharp-tailored suit stepped into the room holding a thick manila folder. I recognized her instantly from the photos on Trent's phone. This was not just a random bank employee. The universe had just delivered the enemy straight into my hands. The woman who walked through the frosted glass doors was a textbook example of arrogant corporate ambition. I knew her name before she even opened her mouth. Courtney. She wore a tailored charcoal skirt suit that fit a little too perfectly. Her blonde hair pulled back into a severe, sleek bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her cheekbones. The expensive perfume she wore preceded her into the room, a cloying, heavy floral scent that masked the underlying odor of pure, unadulterated greed. I stayed seated on the white leather sofa, shrinking my posture even further, pulling my shoulders inward and clutching my designer handbag against my stomach like a physical shield. Courtney approached the glass coffee table, her heels clicking with practiced authority. She looked down at me, and I saw the immediate flash of supreme condescension in her eyes. She did not see a threat. She saw the pathetic, submissive wife her lover complained about. She saw a woman who was about to be discarded, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine hanging directly over her neck. "Good morning, Mrs. Montgomery," Courtney said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that failed to reach her cold, calculating eyes. "I am Courtney, one of the senior loan officers here. The reception desk informed me about Trent's terrible accident. We are all just so devastated for him. Please send him our absolute best wishes for a speedy recovery." I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I reached up to tuck a stray strand of hair behind my ear, ensuring the sleeve of my blouse shifted just enough to expose my wrist, projecting vulnerability. "Thank you, Courtney," I replied, pitching my voice to a breathless, anxious whisper. "It was a horrible night. He is in so much pain, and I am just trying to make sure our household does not fall apart while he is incapacitated. He usually handles all the complex banking matters, and I am honestly completely lost without his guidance." A micro-expression of smug satisfaction twitched at the corner of Courtney's mouth. The sheer blinding arrogance of this woman was almost comical. She was sleeping with a married man, helping him orchestrate a massive federal fraud scheme, and she genuinely believed she was the smartest person in the room. She sat down in the armchair opposite me, crossing her legs and laying the thick manila folder on the glass table with a soft thud. "Well, you do not need to worry your pretty head about a single thing," Mrs. Montgomery Courtney said, adopting the tone one might use to explain a simple concept to a very slow child. "Trent is one of our most valued, sophisticated clients. He has set up everything perfectly. You are in excellent hands. I understand you wanted to review the paperwork for the recent line of credit opened under your name." "Yes, please," I said, leaning forward and putting on my best performance of an overwhelmed housewife. The hospital bills are going to be so complicated, and Trent mentioned we had a new credit line. I just want to make sure I understand the monthly minimums and where the funds are allocated so I do not miss a payment while he is recovering. He gets so frustrated when I make mistakes with the finances. I let my voice catch on the last sentence, hinting at the fear Trent instilled in his wife. Courtney ate it up. Her eyes gleamed with malicious delight. She unclasped the folder and pulled out a stack of dense, legally binding bank documents. She spread them out across the table, tapping a manicured fingernail against the top page. "There is absolutely no need to panic," Courtney cooed, leaning closer to me as if sharing a secret between friends. Trent secured $250,000 in a revolving credit line exactly 3 days ago. The funds have already been fully dispersed to a secondary holding account exactly as he requested. Because the loan is solely in your name, Trent made sure to use your personal signature authorizations. He really does take care of all the heavy lifting for you, does he not? She slid the papers toward me. I looked down at the documents. My tactical mind immediately began processing the data, scanning the routing numbers, the interest rates, and the liability clauses. And there at the bottom of the final page was Bethany's signature. It was a flawless forgery. If I had not known my sister's handwriting intimately, I might have been fooled. Trent and his accomplices had gone to extraordinary lengths to replicate the loop of the B and the specific slant of the Y. But it was definitely a forgery, and Courtney was sitting right in front of me, proudly presenting the physical evidence of her own felony. "Wow," I breathed out, letting my eyes widen in feigned shock. $250,000. That is a very large number. I had no idea Trent needed that much liquidity right now. What did we put up as collateral for something so substantial? Courtney offered a patronizing laugh, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, the collateral is completely secure, Mrs. Montgomery." Trent utilized the equity from a commercial real estate holding company. It is a very standard procedure for high net worth individuals looking to free up capital without disrupting their primary investment portfolios. Really, it is just moving numbers on a screen. You just need to sign this routing acknowledgement form today, so we can finalize the digital transfer protocols for the month. She handed me a silver pen, expecting me to blindly sign away whatever remaining legal rights Bethany had. She thought I was too stupid to question the mechanics of the loan. She thought I would just nod, smile, and walk straight into the slaughterhouse. I took the pen, letting my fingers brush against the cool metal. I stared at the signature line, projecting pure, unadulterated hesitation. I took a deep, shaky breath and set the pen down on the glass table. "I am so sorry, Courtney," I said, shrinking back into the sofa and looking at her with wide, terrified eyes. "I cannot sign this without Trent explaining it to me first. You know how he gets. If I sign a bank document without his explicit permission, he will be absolutely furious with me. He hates when I interfere with his business strategies. I just cannot risk making him angry right now, not with his broken arm." The doctor said stress is terrible for his blood pressure. Courtney's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of genuine annoyance. The transaction needed to be locked in tightly before Friday's divorce ambush. A missing signature on the routing acknowledgement could delay the funds transferring to their offshore accounts. But she quickly masked her irritation, replacing it with a saccharine, condescending smile. "Mrs. Montgomery, I assure you this is just a procedural formality," Courtney urged, tapping the paper again. "Trent already approved the primary disbursement. This is just for the file." I shook my head vigorously, clutching my purse tighter. "I know, and I am so grateful for your help, but I just cannot. Could you possibly print me a copy of all these documents? I can take them home, show them to Trent when he wakes up, and bring the signed acknowledgement form right back to you tomorrow morning. I promise I will make it my absolute first priority. Please, Courtney. I just need to show him I am following his rules." I laid the desperation on thick, making myself look completely broken and entirely subjugated by my husband's authority. Courtney stared at me for a long moment. She weighed the options. Pushing too hard might make the submissive wife panic and cause a scene in the private lounge. Giving me the copies changed nothing in her mind. The primary loan was already executed, and she firmly believed Bethany was too ignorant to understand the financial trap detailed in the pages. She let out a soft, dramatic sigh, playing the role of the patient professional dealing with an incompetent client. "Of course, Mrs. Montgomery," Courtney said, standing up and gathering the documents. "If it makes you feel more comfortable to review them with Trent, I can certainly provide you with a certified copy of the entire file. I will be right back." She walked out of the lounge, her hips swaying with unearned victory. She thought she had won. She thought she was sending a lamb back to the slaughter. I sat perfectly still, regulating my heart rate, keeping my face carefully blank until the frosted glass doors opened again. Courtney returned and handed me a thick, sealed envelope stamped with the bank's golden crest. "Here you are," she said, her voice returning to that sickeningly sweet pitch. "Everything you need is right in there. Please give Trent my absolute best, and I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning with the signed acknowledgement." "Thank you so much," I whispered, taking the envelope with trembling hands. "You have been so kind to me today. I really appreciate your patience." I stood up, keeping my shoulders rounded and my head bowed, and walked out of the private lounge. I moved through the freezing marble-floored lobby, keeping my pace hurried and anxious. I passed the armed security guards, pushed through the heavy revolving doors, and stepped out into the damp gray morning air of downtown Seattle. I maintained the terrified housewife persona until I reached the underground parking garage. I unlocked the luxury SUV, climbed into the driver's seat, and slammed the heavy door shut. The loud thud echoed in the concrete cavern, sealing me inside the soundproof cabin of the vehicle. The moment the door latched, Bethany vanished entirely. My spine snapped straight, my shoulders squared. The artificial anxiety evaporated from my face, leaving behind the cold, calculating precision of a soldier evaluating newly acquired intelligence. I ripped the seal off the bank envelope and pulled out the thick stack of documents. I booted up my encrypted laptop on the passenger seat and brought up the cloned data files I had extracted from Trent's phone earlier that morning. I needed to cross-reference the physical paper trail Courtney had just handed me with the digital footprint Trent had left behind. I flipped through the pages, scanning the dense legal jargon with rapid, practiced efficiency. The loan origination dates matched the text messages exactly. The forged signatures were placed perfectly to bypass standard fraud detection algorithms. Trent and Courtney had executed a flawless, highly illegal financial maneuver to secure $250,000 in liquid cash, leaving Bethany solely liable for the entire debt. But as I reached the final section of the loan agreement, the section detailing the collateral used to secure the $250,000, my eyes locked onto a specific paragraph. I stopped reading. The air in the car suddenly felt very still. Courtney had told me Trent utilized the equity from a commercial real estate holding company. I looked at the exact corporate entity listed on the legal document. I checked the tax identification numbers and the corporate registration codes. I pulled up the corresponding offshore wire transfers on my laptop screen, tracking the exact flow of the money. A cold, dangerous realization washed over me. The collateral was not just some random anonymous corporate holding company. The entity listed on the fraudulent loan documents was registered directly to Donald, my father. Trent was not just securing a personal loan to leave Bethany in ruin. He had leveraged the foundational assets of my father's failing commercial real estate venture to guarantee the debt. He was systematically draining Donald's company dry, siphoning the capital into his hidden offshore accounts, and using my sister's stolen identity as the ultimate scapegoat. My parents had turned a blind eye to Trent beating their daughter because he was their primary financial backer. They had threatened to disown Bethany if she ruined their funding. They worshipped him for his wealth and status. And all the while their golden son-in-law was quietly, ruthlessly embezzling millions from their own family business. Trent was not just planning to destroy Bethany on Friday. He was going to financially annihilate my parents right along with her. I stared at the digital routing numbers on my encrypted laptop screen while sitting inside the soundproof cabin of the luxury SUV. The sheer audacity of Trent's plan was staggering. He was not just a domestic abuser who used his fists to maintain control. He was a financial terrorist operating ruthlessly within his own family. I needed immediate, highly specialized backup to pull the final thread that would completely unravel his empire. I reached into my tactical bag, bypassing my civilian cell phone, and pulled out a heavy matte black satellite phone. I dialed a secure, unlisted number that routed through 3 different encrypted military servers before finally connecting to a windowless basement halfway across the country. The line clicked open with a sharp burst of static. Miller, I said, my voice dropping back into its natural commanding register. I need a deep dive, and I need it completely off the books right now. Miller was the most brilliant cybersecurity specialist in my civil affairs unit. He owed me his life from a particularly bad extraction under heavy fire a few years back, and we maintained an unspoken agreement that favors of this magnitude were redeemed without any bureaucratic questions. I quickly transmitted the cloned data files from Trent's phone over the secure connection, along with the physical account numbers and routing codes Courtney had just handed me inside the bank. I gave Miller the exact operational parameters. I needed the offshore holding accounts cracked, the shell companies mapped, and the wire transfers traced back to their absolute origin points. He worked in total silence for several tense minutes. The only sound, the frantic clacking of a mechanical keyboard transmitting over the encrypted line. Abby. He finally breathed out, his voice laced with genuine, unfiltered shock. What kind of cartel boss did you stumble into? This guy is not just hiding a few marital assets to screw over his wife. He is running a massive, highly sophisticated, systematic embezzlement ring. Miller rapidly explained the architecture of the fraud. Trent had been slowly bleeding his wealthiest hedge fund clients dry for the past 4 years. He used complex algorithmic trading losses to mask the theft, funneling the stolen capital into an intricate web of shell corporations based in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. But the most aggressive concentrated bleeding was localized entirely within Donald's commercial real estate venture. Trent had leveraged his position as the primary investor to gain backdoor access to my father's operational capital. The $250,000 loan Courtney had just pushed through using Bethany's forged signature was merely the final nail in the coffin. It was a calculated trigger designed to cause a cascading default. When the Friday deadline hit, the bank would automatically seize Donald's remaining business assets to cover the fraudulent collateral. My parents, who had explicitly traded their daughter's physical safety for financial security, were already broke. Trent had drained their accounts months ago. They just did not know it yet. I am sending you the complete data package now, Miller said, his tone turning deadly serious. It includes the IP addresses matching Trent's home network, the time-stamped authorization codes, and the direct digital signatures tying him definitively to the offshore accounts. It is absolutely bulletproof, Abby. Federal prosecutors dream about handing cases this clean to a grand jury. I thanked Miller, closed the connection, and wiped the satellite phone's cache to maintain operational security. I secured the laptop and the physical bank documents inside my duffel bag, put the SUV in gear, and drove out of the concrete parking garage. The rain had intensified, washing the Seattle streets in a gray, dismal blur, but my path forward had never been clearer. I navigated toward the highway, heading 2 hours north into the dense, heavily forested mountains, where my commanding officer's off-the-grid cabin sat completely hidden from the world. The long drive gave me time to formulate the exact psychological approach I needed to take with my sister. Bethany was fragile, battered by years of systemic abuse, and deeply conditioned to accept defeat. Breaking the news that her husband was actively attempting to destroy her life, and that her parents were financially ruined, required a delicate but incredibly firm touch. I pulled onto the muddy, unmarked dirt road leading to the secluded cabin. My squad mate, standing guard on the covered front porch with a thermos of coffee and a concealed weapon, gave me a subtle, reassuring nod as I approached. I walked through the heavy wooden door. Bethany was sitting on the edge of a plaid sofa, wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket. She looked physically rested, but the nervous anxiety radiating from her was palpable. When she saw me, her eyes darted immediately to the fake bruise I had painted on my face, a jarring physical reminder of the violent life she had just fled. "Did he hurt you?" Bethany rushed out, standing up quickly and dropping the heavy blanket to the floor. "Did he realize it was you?" He thinks you are standing right by his side, I said, setting my heavy duffel bag on the rustic wooden coffee table. He tripped on his own arrogance, Bethany, and he just handed me the absolute keys to his kingdom. I unzipped the bag and pulled out the thick manila envelope from the bank, followed by my laptop. I sat her down at the table and opened the files. I did not sugarcoat the intelligence. I treated her with the respect of a fellow operative receiving a critical mission briefing. I laid out the forged loan documents, pointing directly to the flawless replication of her signature at the bottom of the pages. I showed her the offshore wire transfers, the massive amounts of debt taken out exclusively in her name, and the impending Friday deadline, when Trent planned to serve her with divorce papers and leave her holding the bag for his federal crimes. Bethany stared at the papers, her eyes rapidly tracking the devastating numbers. I watched her breathing change. The panicked, shallow gasps of a victim slowly deepened into the steady, measured breaths of a survivor, realizing the true, calculated extent of her enemy's betrayal. But the final piece of intelligence was the absolute catalyst. I pulled up the corporate registry documents tying the fraudulent loan collateral directly to Donald's business. "He is bankrupting Mom and Dad," I stated plainly, watching her face process the information. "The people who told you to endure his abuse, the parents who told you to go back to a man who hit you just to save their business, are already ruined. Trent drained their accounts entirely. He used your stolen identity to finalize the theft." I waited for the tears to fall. I fully expected her to mourn the parents who had failed her so spectacularly. Instead, a profound, eerie silence filled the wooden cabin. Bethany reached out and slowly traced her index finger over the forged signature on the bank document. The trembling in her hands completely stopped. When she finally looked up at me, the terrified, submissive schoolteacher was entirely gone. In her place was a woman who had finally been pushed past the breaking point, her deeply ingrained fear incinerating into a cold, brilliant, and absolutely unyielding rage. "He thought I would just take it," Bethany whispered, her voice stripped of all its former fragility. "He thought I would just let him destroy me, frame me for his crimes, and walk away a rich man while I went to prison." "He thought wrong," I replied, a slow, predatory smile matching hers perfectly, "because we are going to burn his entire life to the ground." I opened my encrypted laptop again and initiated a secure video conferencing link. The screen flickered to life, revealing the sharp, intimidating features of a woman sitting in a high-rise corner office, framed by the Seattle skyline. "Bethany," I said, gesturing to the screen, "I would like you to meet Veronica Pierce. She is the most ruthless, aggressive, and highly effective divorce attorney on the West Coast. I put her on a massive retainer this morning using my own military hazard pay." Veronica offered a razor-sharp smile through the high-definition camera. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you, Bethany. Your sister has provided me with a fascinating preliminary briefing. I understand we have a highly sensitive, aggressively timeline-driven financial extraction to execute." Bethany sat up perfectly straight, her shoulders squaring in a flawless mirror image of my own tactical posture. She looked directly into the camera, radiating a newfound untouchable confidence. "We have exactly 48 hours until Friday," Bethany said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "Trent thinks he is going to publicly humiliate me at a high society charity gala and serve me with divorce papers in front of my parents. He thinks he holds all the cards and controls the entire board." "Let him think exactly that," Veronica replied, leaning forward on her mahogany desk and clasping her hands together. "We are going to draft a countersuit so aggressive it will make his corporate legal team weep. By the time the federal authorities finish reviewing the financial package your sister just acquired, Trent will be begging on his knees to sign whatever terms we dictate." We spent the next 2 hours turning the secluded, quiet cabin into a highly functional strategic war room. We charted the exact sequence of events that needed to occur at the Friday night gala. We coordinated the legal filings, the timing of the catastrophic asset freezes, and the precise moment the trap would spring completely shut. Trent had spent years building a towering fortress of lies, physical abuse, and financial manipulation, completely confident that his wealth and status made him untouchable. He had absolutely no idea that the wife he thought he had broken had just allied with a Special Forces intelligence operative and a legal shark to orchestrate his absolute spectacular destruction. I left the secure cabin and drove back to the sprawling suburban estate, my mind calibrating the final phases of the operation. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the Seattle streets slick and gleaming under the streetlights, but the atmosphere inside the luxury SUV remained cold and rigidly focused. Bethany was safe hidden away with a Special Forces guard standing outside her door, her spirit slowly reigniting after years of systematic oppression. Now it was my turn to return to the enemy camp and maintain the illusion until the trap could spring completely shut. I arrived at the empty house, the silence of the massive rooms amplifying the stakes of the mission. I spent the next 24 hours meticulously preserving the cover. I moved through the lavish, sterile environment, ensuring nothing seemed out of place, keeping my burner phone close and waiting patiently for the enemy to make his next move. It came on Thursday afternoon. The sleek smartphone I had synced to Bethany's number vibrated sharply against the cold marble of the kitchen island. I let it ring 3 full times, controlling my breathing and locking my posture into the submissive, terrified role I needed to play before answering with a soft, hesitant greeting. Trent did not bother with pleasantries. His voice crackled through the speaker, dripping with the unwarranted, venomous confidence of a man who believed he held every single string in the puppet show. I could hear the faint ambient hum of a busy corporate floor in the background, indicating he was likely calling from his corner office, completely comfortable orchestrating domestic terror on company time. I hope you have spent the last 2 days reflecting on your disgraceful psychotic behavior. Trent sneered, his tone sharp and commanding. Because tomorrow night is the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala downtown. You are going to pack a formal overnight bag, and you are going to meet me at the house by 5 o'clock to get dressed. Wear the emerald silk gown. It is the only thing in your closet that makes you look even remotely presentable. I pitched my voice perfectly, injecting just enough of a breathless, anxious tremor to feed his ravenous ego. Yes, Trent. Of course. I will be ready. You better be, he snapped, his voice dropping to a menacing pitch. Your parents are going to be sitting at our assigned table. Donald is practically begging me to overlook your hysterical little outburst at the hospital. Tomorrow night is going to be very important for you, Bethany. It is the perfect venue for you to publicly apologize to me for your violent behavior. You are going to stand there, you are going to smile for the cameras, and you are going to show everyone what a grateful, submissive wife looks like. If you humiliate me, or if you even think about stepping out of line, I will ensure your father's business goes entirely bankrupt before Monday morning. I smiled at the kitchen wall. It was a terrifying, genuine, predatory smile. I understand completely, Trent. Tomorrow night, everyone is going to see exactly who I am. I promise you it will be unforgettable. He grunted in deep, arrogant satisfaction, completely oblivious to the lethal double meaning of my words, and abruptly ended the call. The trap was officially set. He was walking willingly into the kill zone, dragging my complicit parents right along with him. Friday evening arrived with a heavy, oppressive stillness hanging in the air. I stood in the master bathroom preparing my armor for the final assault. The emerald silk gown Trent had demanded hung on the heavy wooden door. It was a beautiful, suffocating garment, designed specifically to make the wearer look like an expensive, voiceless accessory rather than an independent human being. I slipped it on the cold, heavy fabric, settling tightly against my skin. I took a tiny encrypted audio transmitter and secured it seamlessly into the inner lining of my clutch purse, establishing a direct, undetectable line of communication to Veronica and Miller, who were standing by in a secure location waiting for my signal. Next came the camouflage. I stood before the brilliantly lit vanity mirror and meticulously reapplied the violent purple and yellow makeup around my left eye, ensuring the fake bruise looked raw, tender, and incredibly painful. It was the absolute centerpiece of the psychological warfare I was about to wage. Let the high society elite see the brutal reality of the man they were about to applaud. Trent arrived at precisely 5 o'clock. His right arm was secured in an expensive black medical sling, a stark, jarring contrast to his perfectly tailored custom tuxedo. He walked into the bedroom and looked at me, his eyes sweeping critically over the emerald gown and the painted bruise on my face, and his lip curled in absolute disgust. "Put some more concealer on that," he barked, gesturing vaguely at my face with his good hand. "You look like a battered street rat. Do not embarrass me tonight." I put on as much as I could, I murmured softly, keeping my head bowed and my shoulders rounded. "It still shows." He scoffed loudly, grabbing a crystal decanter from the bedroom bar cart and pouring himself a heavy, unmeasured glass of scotch. "Whatever. Just keep your head down and keep your mouth shut unless directly spoken to. Let the driver know we are ready to leave." The ride downtown in the back of the massive stretch limousine was a masterclass in narcissistic, unhinged gloating. The heavily tinted windows sealed us inside a dark, moving interrogation room, isolating us from the rest of the world. Trent sat across from me, his long legs stretched out, a fresh glass of bourbon resting precariously on his knee. The potent mixture of alcohol and heavy prescription painkillers was fueling a toxic manic energy within him. He was physically vibrating with the anticipation of his impending victory. He genuinely believed that in just a few short hours, he would be a free, incredibly wealthy man, while his wife would be trapped in a locked psychiatric ward, facing overwhelming federal debt. "You really have no idea how incredibly stupid you are, Bethany." Trent began swirling the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking sharply in the quiet cabin. "You actually thought you could challenge me. You thought you had some kind of upper hand because you got lucky and hurt my shoulder. But you are nothing. You have always been nothing. The only reason you have this dress, this lifestyle, or a single shred of relevance in this entire city is because I allowed it." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly in my lap, letting him dig his own grave with every word he spoke. "By midnight tonight, everything changes," he continued, leaning forward, his eyes burning with a dark, malicious delight. "You are going to apologize to me in front of your parents. You are going to grovel for their forgiveness and mine. And then I am going to leave you with absolutely nothing. When the divorce papers hit, you are going to walk out of that house with the clothes on your back and not a single penny more. You will be drowning in debt you cannot even comprehend." He took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink, savoring the taste of his perceived triumph. "You think your parents are going to save you? Donald would sell you to the highest bidder for a fraction of what I invest in his pathetic real estate ventures. They chose me, Bethany. They chose my money, my status, and my power over their own daughter. You are completely alone." He expected tears. He expected me to break down, to beg, to plead for mercy, to ask him what I could do to change his mind and save my life. He wanted the ultimate sick satisfaction of watching me crumble completely before he delivered the final fatal blow to my sister's existence. Instead, I did the one thing he absolutely could not process. I smiled. It was not a forced, trembling, terrified smile. It was a serene, blindingly bright apex predator's smile. I looked him dead in the eye, my posture instantly shifting from the shrinking, terrified wife into the rigid, absolute stillness of a highly trained combat operative preparing to strike. "You are absolutely right, Trent," I said. My voice dropped, the high-pitched, anxious tremor I had used flawlessly all week. My natural tone resonated in the quiet, enclosed cabin of the limousine. It was cool, calm, and utterly lethal. Donald and Barbara made their choice a long time ago. I continued, holding his gaze with unblinking intensity. They chose wealth over family. They chose appearances over protection. And you are right about tonight, too. By midnight, everything changes. Trent froze completely. The arrogant smirk died instantly on his face. The hand holding his bourbon trembled slightly, spilling a few drops of the amber liquid onto his expensive trousers. He stared at me, his brow furrowing in deep, visceral confusion. The woman sitting across from him was wearing his wife's face, wearing his wife's clothes, but the energy radiating from her was completely alien. It was heavy, dark, and terrifyingly controlled. "What are you smiling at?" Trent demanded, his voice abruptly losing its arrogant edge, replaced by a sudden sharp spike of genuine creeping anxiety. "Wipe that look off your face right now." I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees, never breaking eye contact for a millisecond. I am smiling because I agree with you, Trent. Tonight is the perfect venue. All your wealthy friends, your corrupt business partners, my toxic parents, the entire social registry of Seattle, they are all going to be sitting in one single room. It is the absolute perfect audience. Tonight, everyone is going to get exactly what they deserve. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the limousine, pressing in on him from all sides. Trent opened his mouth to speak, to assert his dominance, to yell, but the words completely died in his throat. He looked at my calm, dead eyes, and a primal, instinctual fear crawled violently up his spine. His subconscious was screaming at him, warning him that he had walked blindly into a trap, but his massive, inflated ego refused to let him understand how. He shifted extremely uncomfortably against the plush leather seats, suddenly hyper-aware of his immobilized right arm and the severe physical vulnerability it presented against the woman sitting across from him. "You are losing your mind," Trent muttered, looking away from me and staring out the tinted window at the passing city lights, his breathing becoming slightly erratic. "You are completely insane. My lawyers are going to have an absolute field day with you. I am looking forward to meeting them," I replied softly, settling back into the leather seat and smoothing the emerald silk over my knees. The limousine slowed smoothly as we approached the grand illuminated entrance of the downtown hotel hosting the charity gala. Crowds of elegantly dressed people milled around the valet stand, bathed in the rapid, blinding flash of event photographers. The moment had finally arrived. Trent aggressively adjusted his medical sling, took a final desperate gulp of his bourbon, and plastered a fake, charming, media-ready smile onto his pale face as the chauffeur opened the heavy door. I stepped out into the cool evening air, the camera flashbulbs reflecting brilliantly off the fake bruise I wore as a deliberate badge of honor. Trent offered me his good arm, desperately playing the part of the devoted, tragically injured husband. I linked my arm through his, feeling his muscles tense rigidly underneath the fine fabric of his tuxedo. He was terrified, and he did not even know the half of it yet. The calm before the storm was officially over. It was time to bring the thunder. The grand ballroom of the hotel was a staggering display of engineered opulence. We walked through towering mahogany doors into a cavernous space bathed in the warm golden glow of massive crystal chandeliers. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated through the crowd with silver trays of champagne navigating a sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns. The air was thick with the scent of roasted truffles, expensive orchids, and the sharp metallic tang of ruthless ambition. This was the absolute pinnacle of Seattle high society, a room packed wall to wall with corporate titans, political power brokers, and old money heirs. Trent leaned heavily on my arm as we navigated the entrance, maximizing his limp and wincing theatrically for the benefit of the event photographers. He was playing the wounded martyr to perfection, soaking up the sympathetic gasps and concerned murmurs from the guests, who noticed his black medical sling. I kept my face angled slightly downward, presenting the perfect image of the subdued, attentive spouse, all while my eyes systematically scanned the perimeter. I mapped the emergency exits, located the security details, and mentally categorized the crowd into threat levels. We had barely made it past the coat check when the familiar, suffocating presence of my parents descended upon us. Barbara and Donald materialized from the crowd like sharks scenting blood in the water. My mother wore a heavily sequined silver gown that screamed for attention, a stark contrast to the strained, frantic energy radiating from her rigid posture. Donald trailed half a step behind her, dabbing his sweating forehead with a cocktail napkin, looking like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. "Trent, my poor darling," Barbara cooed immediately, reaching out to hover her manicured hands over his uninjured shoulder. She entirely blocked me from view, treating me as nothing more than a coat rack holding her son-in-law upright. We were so worried. "Donald has been pacing the floor all day. Are you in terrible pain?" Trent offered her a brave, strained smile. "I am managing Barbara. It takes more than a clumsy fall to keep me away from a good cause. Besides, Bethany was very insistent that we make an appearance tonight to support the hospital." He threw me directly under the bus, framing my presence as an unreasonable, selfish demand that he was valiantly indulging despite his severe injury. It was a masterful sociopathic manipulation. Barbara finally turned her gaze to me, and her expression instantly curdled into a mask of profound, unfiltered disgust. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper meant only for my ears. "Bethany, what in the name of God is on your face?" she hissed, her eyes locking onto the heavy layer of foundation and the dark purple edges of the fake bruise peeking through. "You look like you just crawled out of a back alley. I told you to cover that up. You are embarrassing us in front of the entire board of directors." I kept my posture submissive, my hands folded demurely over my evening clutch. "I put on as much makeup as I could, Mom," I replied softly, my tone perfectly matching my sister's usual anxious cadence. "The swelling is just very bad today." Donald crowded in next to her, his face flushed an angry mottled red. He smelled heavily of gin and desperation. "I do not care about your swelling," he growled under his breath, his eyes darting around to ensure none of the wealthy guests were listening. "I care about my commercial real estate funding. Trent's partners are sitting at our table tonight. You are going to go over there, you are going to keep your mouth shut, and you are going to smile. You will cater to his every single need. If you cause a scene or if you do anything to make Trent look bad and jeopardize my capital, I will personally ensure you are cut out of this family forever. You will have nothing." He was threatening his own daughter with total abandonment to protect the man who was currently bankrupting him. The sheer blinding ignorance of his greed was breathtaking. I looked at the two people who had created me, who had thrown me out for joining the military, and who were now actively holding my sister down so her abuser could destroy her. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt nothing but cold, clinical, absolute zero. "I promise, Dad," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "I will do exactly what is required of me tonight. I will make sure everyone sees Trent for exactly who he is. You do not need to worry about a thing." My tone was soft, but the absolute lack of fear in my voice caused Donald to falter for a fraction of a second. He frowned, opening his mouth to issue another threat, but Trent suddenly cleared his throat loudly. "If you will excuse me," Donald Trent interrupted smoothly. "The event organizers are motioning for me near the main stage. They want me to prepare for the keynote address. Keep an eye on Bethany for me. She has been very emotionally unstable since my accident." Trent gave my parents a meaningful, solemn look, planting the final seeds of the narrative he was about to unleash. He pulled his arm free from my grasp and walked away, disappearing into the glittering crowd. Barbara and Donald immediately grabbed my elbows like prison guards, steering me forcefully toward a large circular table near the front of the stage. "Sit down and do not speak unless someone asks you a direct question," Barbara commanded, pushing me into a velvet chair. I sat obediently, placing my clutch on my lap. Inside the small silk purse, my thumb brushed against the hidden audio transmitter, verifying it was armed and broadcasting. Veronica and Miller were listening to every single word. The digital snare was armed. I used the reflection in a nearby silver serving platter to scan the room behind me. While Barbara engaged in aggressive artificial small talk with the wealthy couples joining our table, my eyes cut through the crowd searching for the anomaly. In a room full of bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns, predators always stand out. I found them standing near the primary emergency exit doors on the left side of the ballroom. Two men in sharply tailored but distinctly corporate charcoal suits. They were not mingling. They were not drinking champagne. They stood with their backs against the wall, their eyes tracking the room with cold professional vigilance. One of them held a thick, heavy manila envelope resting against his side. The other was tapping a high-end earpiece. These were not security guards. These were the legal executioners, Trent's lawyers. They were positioned perfectly to block the exit. They held the emergency 72-hour psychiatric hold order, signed by a corrupt or misled judge, wrapped up alongside the finalized divorce filings. Trent had mobilized them to execute the ambush the exact second he gave the signal. They were waiting to serve me in front of 500 of Seattle's most influential citizens, ensuring maximum public humiliation and guaranteeing my sister would be forcibly dragged out of the building in a straitjacket. A sudden sharp burst of audio feedback echoed through the grand ballroom, instantly silencing the chatter of the wealthy crowd. The massive high-definition screens flanking the main stage flickered to life, projecting the logo of the Children's Hospital Foundation. A hush fell over the room as the spotlight swung to the center of the stage. Trent stepped up to the acrylic podium. He adjusted his black medical sling with his good hand, milking the moment for every ounce of manufactured sympathy it was worth. He looked out over the sea of faces, his posture radiating a sickening blend of false humility and supreme arrogance. He leaned into the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," Trent said, his voice echoing smoothly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support such an incredible, vital cause. As many of you know, I had a severe accident at my home recently, but looking out at all of you, seeing the generosity in this room, I knew I could not let a little physical pain keep me away." A ripple of polite, admiring applause washed through the crowd. Barbara sighed loudly next to me, visibly swooning over her golden son-in-law. Donald puffed out his chest, looking around the table to ensure everyone knew he was related to the man on stage. Trent raised his hand to quiet the applause. He looked down from the podium, his eyes scanning the tables until they locked directly onto mine. The mask of the charitable philanthropist slipped for a microscopic second, revealing the dark, malicious shark hiding underneath. "But tonight is not just about charity," Trent continued, his voice dropping into a somber, heavily affected register of fake sorrow. "Tonight is also about facing difficult truths. It is about acknowledging when the people we love are hurting, and when they are no longer in control of their own actions." The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted instantly. The cheerful clinking of glasses stopped entirely. The guests leaned forward, sensing the sudden, deeply uncomfortable turn the speech was taking. This was not a standard charity toast anymore. This was a public execution. Trent looked over my head, shifting his gaze to the back of the room. He gave a sharp, deliberate nod toward the emergency exit doors. From my peripheral vision, I saw the two men in the charcoal suits push off the wall. They began moving down the center aisle, walking with aggressive, synchronized purpose directly toward my table. The man holding the thick manila envelope raised it slightly, preparing to deliver the legal death blow. "I have always tried to be a supportive husband." Trent's voice boomed through the speakers, dripping with manufactured heartbreak. "I have tried to protect my wife. But recently, Bethany has suffered a severe, catastrophic break from reality. Her mental health has deteriorated into violent, unstable paranoia. I have tried to handle it privately, but the tragedy has finally reached a point where I must take drastic, heartbreaking measures to ensure her safety and the safety of those around her." Barbara gasped loudly next to me, her hands flying to her mouth in a performance of utter shock. Donald gripped the edge of the table, his face turning pale as he realized Trent was airing their dirty laundry on the biggest stage in the city. The lawyers were 20 feet away. Trent took a deep, shuddering breath for the cameras, raising his hand toward my table. "It breaks my heart to do this in front of all our friends and colleagues, but my wife needs immediate, involuntary psychiatric intervention. Bethany, I am so sorry." The lawyers closed the distance, stepping up to the edge of our table. The man with the envelope reached out to hand it to me, preparing to announce the federal psychiatric hold. The trap was officially sprung. The jaws were snapping shut. I did not panic. I did not cry. I did not shrink into the velvet chair. I unclasped the latch of my silk clutch, stood up from the table, and smoothed the front of the emerald gown. I looked at the lawyer extending the envelope, then looked up at Trent standing victoriously on the illuminated stage. I smiled. I did not reach for the manila envelope. I did not even look at the lawyer extending it toward me. Instead, I sidestepped the men in charcoal suits with a fluid, evasive maneuver drilled into my muscle memory from countless close-quarters combat exercises. The lawyer holding the psychiatric hold order blinked his hand left, hanging in the empty space where I had just been standing. Before he could recalibrate or attempt to grab my arm, I was already moving past the perimeter they had established. My mother gasped behind me, her chair scraping harshly against the floorboards as her hand grabbed blindly for the silk fabric of my dress. She caught nothing but empty air. "Bethany, sit down," she hissed, her voice laced with panic and the desperate need to maintain control over the family image. I completely ignored her. I strode down the center aisle of the ballroom, the heavy emerald silk billowing behind me with every calculated step. My posture was no longer that of a cowering, abused wife shrinking under the weight of high society. My spine was steel, my chin was raised. I walked with the heavy, rhythmic, undeniable cadence of a soldier advancing directly on an enemy position. The polite murmurs in the crowd abruptly died away. The wealthy elite of Seattle parted like the Red Sea, stepping back from the sheer radiating intensity of my advance. The hotel security guards stationed at the base of the stage shifted nervously, their hands resting near their radios, but they did not intervene. In their eyes, I was still the wealthy wife of the keynote speaker. They had no protocol for a submissive spouse turning into a tactical threat. Trent watched me approach the stage, his fake, sorrowful expression fracturing into genuine, wide-eyed panic. This was absolutely not in his script. Bethany was supposed to collapse at the table into a weeping, hysterical mess when the lawyers cornered her. She was supposed to be dragged out screaming, providing the perfect tragic visual proof for his narrative of her insanity. Instead, I ascended the carpeted stairs to the main stage with absolute terrifying calm. Trent instinctively took a half-step backward, his good hand gripping the edge of the clear acrylic podium as if it could somehow shield him from the storm he had just summoned into the room. I stepped right up to him, invading his personal space with aggressive precision. I did not yell. I did not shove him. I simply reached out my hand, closing firmly over the metal stem of the microphone. Trent tried to hold on, his knuckles turning white, trying to maintain his grip on his power in front of his peers. I applied a subtle, excruciating downward pressure on his immobilized right shoulder, using just 2 fingers completely hidden from the audience's view by the angle of our bodies. A sharp, involuntary hiss of pain escaped his lips, and his muscles spasmed. He released the microphone, instantly stepping back with a look of pure terror. I adjusted the stand, pulling it toward me, taking absolute control of the stage, the room, and the narrative. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice boomed through the state-of-the-art sound system, ringing with a deep, commanding authority that sent a visible shockwave through the audience. This was not the breathy, anxious whisper of Trent's trophy wife. This was the voice of a woman accustomed to issuing orders in hostile territories. "My husband is a phenomenal actor." I continued, my cold gaze sweeping across the sea of upturned, bewildered faces. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. He has spent the last 5 minutes spinning a heartbreaking, carefully rehearsed tale about my deteriorating mental health. He has positioned himself as the noble, suffering patriarch, forced to make an impossible choice for the safety of his family. He has brought ruthless corporate lawyers here tonight, hiding like cowards by the emergency exit doors, ready to serve me with an involuntary psychiatric hold and divorce papers the exact moment you all looked away. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom, heads turned toward the back of the room, spotting the 2 men in charcoal suits who suddenly looked very exposed and extremely nervous. I saw Donald and Barbara frozen at their table, their faces drained of all blood, looking like wax figures trapped under the dim lighting. Trent lunged forward, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "Bethany, what are you doing?" he hissed under his breath, his eyes darting wildly toward the security guards. "Stop this right now. You are making a fool of yourself. Get off the stage." I ignored him completely, keeping my eyes locked on the crowd of investors, socialites, and philanthropists. "But Trent is not a tragic hero," I announced, my voice cutting through the rising murmur of the ballroom like a scythe. "He is a predator. And while his acting skills are truly commendable, it turns out he is an absolutely terrible embezzler." I reached into my silk clutch and tapped the hidden audio transmitter twice with my thumb. It was the synchronized, pre-planned signal to Miller and Veronica, who were sitting in a secure digital war room miles away, holding the hacked administrative keys to the hotel's audiovisual system. "Execute override," I murmured softly, the words picked up perfectly by the hidden microphone. Instantly, the massive high-definition screens flanking the main stage went pitch black. The glowing logo of the Children's Hospital Foundation vanished. For a split second, the ballroom was plunged into shadows filled only with the confused muttering of 500 guests. Then, with a sharp digital crackle, the screens flared back to life. But they were no longer showing charity promotional videos or silent auction items. The screens illuminated the room with the glaring, undeniable reality of Trent's massive financial crimes. On the left screen, a massive blown-up image of the bank loan documents appeared in stark black and white. The bold text outlined the $250,000 credit line, but the focus was highly zoomed in on the bottom of the final page. It displayed the forged signature of Bethany Montgomery clear and crisp for the entire room to analyze. On the right screen, a complex color-coded web of offshore wire transfers populated the high-definition display. Bright red arrows traced the flow of stolen capital directly from the accounts of Trent's wealthiest hedge fund clients, many of whom were sitting right here in this room, straight into anonymous shell corporations registered in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. A collective murmur of shock turned into a deafening uproar of outrage as the elite attendees recognized their own names and the names of their holding companies plastered on the screen as victims of a massive Ponzi scheme. But the digital execution did not stop there. The screens shifted again seamlessly, replacing the complex banking documents with a rapid scrolling display of text messages. The contact name Courtney glowed at the top of the chat logs, complete with a red heart emoji. The messages were explicit, crude, and deeply incriminating. The crowd read in real time as Trent and his mistress discussed moving the stolen funds, forging Bethany's signature on federal documents, and laughing about leaving his wife completely destitute and locked in a psychiatric ward by Friday night. The timestamps proved the conspiracy was active, ongoing, and entirely malicious. One specific text message was highlighted in bright, glowing yellow, expanding to fill the entire right screen. It was from Trent to Courtney, sent just 3 days prior. It read, "I leveraged Donald's commercial real estate firm for the final collateral. As soon as Bethany is locked in the psych ward, the bank will seize her father's assets to cover our tracks. The old fool practically handed me the keys to his kingdom. He is completely bankrupt and does not even know it yet." I looked down at my parents' table. Donald was staring up at the glowing screen, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of total, irreversible financial devastation. The golden son-in-law, he had blindly protected the man he had allowed to brutally beat his daughter just to secure his business funding, had completely destroyed him. Barbara clutched her chest, hyperventilating, as the social elite around her turned their judging, furious, and mocking stares directly toward her table. The parents who had worshipped money over their own children had just lost everything in front of the entire city. Trent was physically shaking. The sheer overwhelming magnitude of his sudden exposure had completely shattered his mind. His pristine, untouchable world of privilege and power had been incinerated in less than 60 seconds. He looked at the massive screens displaying his federal crimes, then looked at me, his face contorting into a mask of feral, cornered rage. He forgot where he was. He forgot the news cameras, the wealthy crowd, the security guards, and the remaining shred of his public image. His ego could not process the defeat. He lunged toward me, his good hand reaching out violently, intending to physically drag me away from the podium. "Bethany, shut your mouth," he screamed, his voice raw, hideous, and echoing loudly through the live microphone. He raised his hand fully, intending to strike me down in front of half the city, reverting to the only type of control he truly understood. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I reached into my small silk clutch and slowly, deliberately withdrew a single pre-moistened makeup wipe. I held his furious, terrified gaze as I brought the damp white cloth to my left cheek. With one firm, sweeping motion, I wiped away the deep purple, the sickly yellow, and the angry red pigments. The heavy theatrical foundation smeared onto the cloth, leaving behind completely pristine, unblemished skin. There was no bruise. There was no trauma. The physical proof of his domestic terror vanished, replaced by the flawless, hardened face of a woman who had never once been his victim. I dropped the stained makeup wipe onto the clear acrylic podium. I leaned directly into the microphone, locking my eyes dead onto his panicked, shrinking pupils, and delivered the final fatal blow. "Bethany is not here," I said, my voice dropping to a chilling, absolute calm that resonated through every speaker in the grand ballroom. "Bethany is currently at the local precinct filing a federal fraud report alongside a team of very eager investigators. I am her identical twin sister, Abby." I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch just long enough for the sheer terror of his mistake to fully register in his widening eyes. "And you have a terrible right hook." The silence in the room fractured into 1,000 shards of chaotic noise. The collective gasp of the social elite transformed into a roar of shock, outrage, and frantic murmuring. Trent stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck by a freight train. His eyes darted wildly between my pristine, unblemished face and the massive digital screens projecting his federal crimes for the entire city to see. His brain simply could not process the catastrophic system failure he was experiencing. The fragile, terrified wife he thought he had completely broken was safe, and a hardened military operative was standing in her place, holding the detonator to his entire life. Before Trent could even formulate a coherent sentence, the heavy thud of rapid footsteps echoed on the wooden stairs leading up to the stage. My parents, Donald and Barbara, breached the perimeter. They bypassed the stunned hotel security guards driven purely by the blinding, desperate need to protect their fragile social standing. Barbara reached the podium first. She looked ridiculous, her heavily sequined silver gown catching the harsh stage lights as she raised a trembling manicured finger and pointed it directly at my face. Abigail Barbara shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical rage, completely ignoring the massive projector screens detailing her golden son-in-law's embezzlement. "What are you doing, you malicious, jealous little brat? You come in here dressed like your sister to ruin the most important night of our lives. You are destroying this family. You always have to ruin everything for Bethany because you could never land a husband like Trent." Donald shoved past her. He was sweating profusely, his face a mottled, dangerous shade of purple. He did not care about the forged loans or the explicit text messages proving Trent had severely beaten Bethany. He only cared about his commercial real estate funding. He marched right up to the acrylic podium, invading my personal space, trying to use the same bullying tactics he had used on me in the hospital corridor just 24 hours earlier. "Turn those screens off right now," Donald roared, slamming his heavy fist onto the podium. He leaned in his breath, reeking of expensive gin and absolute panic. "I knew we should never have let you back into our lives. You are a complete disgrace to the family name. Turn those screens off and get out of this building before I have you arrested for trespassing. Trent is the only reason my company is staying afloat. You are jeopardizing everything we have built just to play some sick prank." I did not step back. I looked at the two people who had created me, the people who had disowned me for choosing a life of military service and who had actively, willingly enabled my sister's abuser simply to line their own pockets. I leaned directly into the microphone, ensuring that every single syllable I spoke would ring out with crystal clarity across the grand ballroom. "You do not have a company anymore, Donald," I said, my voice echoing like a death knell over the 500 wealthy guests. Donald froze, his fist still resting on the podium. Barbara stopped shrieking, her mouth snapping shut. "You sold your soul and your daughter's physical safety to keep your commercial real estate venture afloat." I continued, my tone mathematically precise and utterly devoid of pity. "You told Bethany that if she ruined your funding, you would throw her out on the street. You backed a man who beats his wife because he promised you capital, but you backed a parasite. Look at the screens, Donald. Read the routing numbers. Read the corporate registration codes." I gestured toward the massive digital display projecting the intricate web of offshore accounts. Donald slowly turned his head, his eyes tracking the bright red arrows flowing across the screen. "Trent did not just take out $250,000 fraudulent loan in Bethany's name," I explained, projecting my voice to the furthest corners of the room. "He used the primary operational equity of your commercial real estate holding company as the guaranteed collateral. He leveraged the specific downtown properties you spent 30 years acquiring. He has been systematically siphoning your assets into shell corporations registered in Cyprus for the past 8 months. When the bank initiates the automated default protocols at midnight tonight, they will seize every single brick, every single property, and every single cent tied to your name. The color completely drained from Donald's face, leaving him looking like a hollow walking corpse. His eyes darted frantically across the digital projections, his lips moving silently as he finally recognized the tax identification numbers belonging to his own life's work. The horrific, undeniable realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. "You are bankrupt, Donald," I stated, sealing his fate with cold, hard facts. "You are entirely, completely, and irrevocably ruined. And the man you protected over your own flesh and blood is the exact person who bled you dry." Barbara let out a high-pitched, strangled wail. Her hands flew to the sides of her head as if she was trying to physically block out the truth. She looked at Trent, her beloved wealthy son-in-law, and saw the absolute naked terror written across his sweating face. The realization that they had sacrificed their daughter's well-being for absolutely nothing shattered whatever remained of her fragile status, obsessed psyche. They had enabled an abuser, alienated both of their children, and lost every single penny in the process. They were about to become the laughingstock of the very country club elite they worshipped. Trent suddenly snapped out of his paralyzed state. The heavy, ornate double doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom had just swung open with tremendous force. The polite, wealthy crowd parted instantly, creating a wide, unobstructed path down the center aisle. A dozen men and women wearing tactical windbreakers, emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of federal investigative agencies, marched into the room. Their faces were grim, their badges prominently displayed on their belts. Miller had executed his part of the operation flawlessly, handing the digital intelligence package directly to the right federal prosecutors, with enough irrefutable evidence to secure immediate high-priority arrest warrants. Trent's high-priced corporate lawyers, who had been standing by the emergency exit just moments ago, holding the psychiatric hold papers, took one look at the advancing federal agents. They made a highly calculated, instantaneous career decision. They dropped the manila envelope onto a nearby cocktail table, turned on their heels, and quietly slipped out the side door, completely abandoning their sinking client to save their own legal licenses. Trent saw the federal agents advancing toward the stage. The primal, desperate instinct of a cornered animal took over his mind completely. He did not think about his public image, his expensive custom tuxedo, or his remaining dignity. He turned away from the acrylic podium, his eyes locking onto the heavy velvet curtains draped behind the stage that led toward the hotel kitchen service corridors. He bolted. He sprinted toward the back of the stage, his good arm pumping wildly, his polished dress shoes slipping slightly on the smooth wooden floorboards. He was trying to escape the unavoidable consequences of his own monumental arrogance, but he was running from a highly trained Special Forces operative. I did not shout. I did not chase him across the stage like a frantic civilian. I simply pivoted on my heel and took two rapid, precisely calculated tactical steps, cutting off his direct angle of escape. As Trent barreled past me, completely blinded by panic and the sheer desperation of a ruined man, I extended my right leg with the fluid, effortless mechanics of a tactical combat sweep. My foot caught his ankle dead center mid-stride. The sudden violent interruption of his momentum sent his center of gravity pitching wildly forward. Trent let out a sharp, breathless cry of alarm as he went entirely airborne, his body twisting uncontrollably in the air. He had completely forgotten about his immobilized, recently dislocated right shoulder strapped tightly against his chest in the heavy black medical sling. Trent crashed onto the hard wooden stage floor with a sickening heavy thud, landing squarely and brutally on his injured side. The loud, wet pop of the joint ripping out of its socket for the second time in 24 hours echoed sharply through the live microphone still resting on the podium. An agonizing, blood-curdling scream tore from his throat, cutting through the dead silence of the ballroom. He rolled onto his back, his face contorted in absolute blinding agony, kicking his legs as the white-hot pain scrambled his central nervous system. The elegant, untouchable hedge fund executive was reduced to a pathetic, writhing mess on the floorboards, weeping openly in front of his wealthy peers, his financially ruined in-laws, and the woman who had orchestrated his complete systematic destruction. The federal agents swarmed the stage seconds later. They did not show an ounce of pity for his severe injuries. Two agents grabbed Trent by his uninjured arm and the fabric of his ruined tuxedo jacket, hauling him roughly to his feet. He groaned in terrible pain, his legs buckling beneath him, entirely unable to support his own weight. Trent Montgomery, the lead agent, announced, his voice cold and loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "You are under arrest for massive wire fraud, grand larceny, identity theft, and corporate embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it immediately." The agent snapped a heavy pair of steel handcuffs onto his left wrist, attaching the other cuff to a thick leather transport belt wrapped tightly around his waist to accommodate his broken shoulder. The distinct metallic click of the restraints echoed like a final, unyielding verdict in the grand ballroom. The high society elite of Seattle, the people Trent had spent years trying to impress, manipulate, and ultimately steal from, watched in stunned, disgusted silence as the federal agent's frog marched him down the center aisle. There were no sympathetic murmurs. There was no pity. There was only the cold, harsh reality of a predator finally being dragged out into the blinding light of justice. I stood at the acrylic podium, my posture tall and unyielding, watching the grand doors swing shut behind him. Donald and Barbara remained frozen at the edge of the stage, their entire universe reduced to absolute ashes at their feet. They had nothing left to say, and I had absolutely nothing left to give them. The public execution was complete and the financial war was officially over. 3 months had passed since the charity gala, and the dust settling over the Seattle skyline left a vastly different landscape in its wake. The federal justice system moves with a notoriously slow grind, but when handed a perfectly packaged, digitally verified, and irrefutable mountain of evidence, the wheels turn with terrifying speed. Trent's sprawling, arrogant empire collapsed overnight. The morning after his highly public arrest, federal agents raided his corporate headquarters, hauling away boxes of encrypted hard drives and hidden financial ledgers. Trent was denied bail. The presiding judge cited his immense offshore resources and clear status as a severe flight risk. He was currently sitting in a federal detention center, forced to trade his custom-tailored silk suits for a standard-issue abrasive orange jumpsuit. His high-priced legal team abandoned him the second his accounts were frozen by the government. He was assigned an overworked public defender who took one look at the cloned text messages and the forged bank documents and advised him to plead guilty immediately. Trent was facing a mandatory minimum of a decade in federal prison for massive wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate embezzlement. The man who had used his wealth as a weapon to terrorize his wife was now entirely stripped of his power, locked in an 8x10 concrete cell, completely and utterly alone. Courtney, the arrogant loan officer who had smirked at me across the glass coffee table, did not fare much better. The moment the FBI walked into her private wealth management branch, her smug superiority evaporated entirely. She immediately attempted to turn state's evidence, weeping in the interrogation room and claiming Trent had manipulated her into processing the fraudulent loans. The federal prosecutors were thoroughly unimpressed. The digital trail Miller had extracted proved she was a highly willing, greedy accomplice who had actively engineered the forged signatures to secure her own massive commission bonuses. She was permanently stripped of her banking license, blacklisted from the entire global financial sector, and was currently facing severe felony accomplice charges that would guarantee she spent the best years of her life behind bars. The bank, terrified of the catastrophic public relations nightmare and the impending federal audits, immediately voided the $250,000 debt attached to Bethany's name. They wiped the fraudulent loans from her credit history as if they had never existed. On the civil front, Veronica executed her legal mandate with the surgical, bloodthirsty precision I had paid her for. She filed the divorce papers the Monday following the gala, alongside a massive civil suit for damages. Because Trent's illicit assets were seized by the government, Veronica went after his remaining legitimate clean capital. She dismantled his real estate holdings, his luxury vehicles, and his pristine investment portfolios. Bethany walked away with an ironclad multi-million-dollar settlement. She was completely free of debt, fully untethered from her abuser and holding the financial keys to her own absolute independence. While Bethany was rising from the ashes, Barbara and Donald were experiencing a terrifying, uncontrolled freefall from the absolute apex of high society straight into the brutal concrete of total bankruptcy. The automated banking protocols I had warned them about on the gala stage executed flawlessly. At midnight, the financial institutions initiated the default clauses. They seized every single commercial property tied to Donald's name to cover the massive collateral deficit Trent had engineered. Donald's life work evaporated in keystrokes. But the financial ruin was only the beginning. The social exile was absolute and immediate. The country club elite, the people my parents had worshipped and sacrificed their own daughter to impress, severed all ties instantly. Barbara's social calendar went completely dead. Their exclusive memberships were revoked. Donald attempted to secure emergency bridge loans from his wealthy golf partners, only to have his calls aggressively screened and his emails ignored. They were radioactive. They were the punchline of every high society dinner party in the city. The bank eventually foreclosed on their sprawling suburban mansion. The repo men arrived in broad daylight loading Barbara's antique furniture and Donald's luxury vehicles onto flatbed trucks, while the neighbors watched through their pristine curtains. Bethany was completely insulated from their collapse. She had moved into a stunning state-of-the-art high-rise apartment overlooking the deep blue waters of the Puget Sound. The building featured 24-hour armed security biometric scanners and a concierge service that strictly vetted every single visitor. Her new home was flooded with natural light filled with warm, comfortable furniture and entirely devoid of the cold, sterile, intimidating luxury that Trent had favored. The heavy layers of designer makeup and the restrictive, suffocating clothing were gone. Bethany looked vibrant, healthy, and profoundly at peace. She had reclaimed her maiden name, her sanity, and her future. I was sitting on her plush, oversized sofa on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, reviewing some deployment logistics on my encrypted laptop when the secure intercom mounted on the wall chimed sharply. Bethany walked over and pressed the audio button. The concierge's voice filtered through the speaker, sounding distinctly apologetic and highly stressed. "Ms. Pierce," the concierge began, "I am so sorry to disturb you. There are two individuals down here in the main lobby causing quite a disturbance. They claim to be your parents. They bypassed the outer security gate by following a delivery truck inside. I have asked them to leave, but they are refusing. Shall I call the police to have them escorted off the premises?" Bethany did not panic. She did not tremble. She looked at me across the sunlit living room. The terrified, submissive schoolteacher I had rescued from a violent marriage was completely gone. In her place stood a woman forged in fire, possessing a quiet, untouchable, and absolute strength. "No," Bethany told the concierge, her voice perfectly level and completely calm. "Send them up. I will handle this." I closed my laptop and stood up, moving slightly out of the direct line of sight from the front door, allowing Bethany to take absolute center stage. 2 minutes later, a frantic, heavy knock echoed against the solid oak door. Bethany reached out and smoothly disengaged the deadbolt, pulling the heavy door open. Barbara and Donald stood in the brightly lit hallway. The sight of them was a staggering testament to how quickly arrogance rots when stripped of its funding. They looked visibly aged, utterly defeated, and completely stripped of their manufactured glamour. Donald was wearing an off-the-shelf, poorly fitted suit that looked like it had not been pressed in weeks. He was hunched over, his posture completely devoid of its usual bullying authority. Barbara looked even worse. The perfect, expensive blowout was gone. Her hair pulled back into a messy, frantic knot. Her designer clothing hung loosely on her frame. The suffocating scent of her expensive floral perfume had been replaced by the sharp, undeniable odor of pure, unadulterated desperation. "Bethany," Barbara gasped out, her voice cracking, as she immediately launched into a pathetic weeping routine. "Oh, thank God. Thank God you are here. We have been trying to reach you for weeks. Why did you change your number? We have been out of our minds with worry." She reached out, attempting to grab Bethany's hands, trying to force a maternal connection that had never genuinely existed. Bethany took a single, precise half-step backward, allowing Barbara's hands to grasp nothing but empty air. The physical boundary was absolute. Donald stepped forward, his eyes darting frantically around the luxurious entryway of Bethany's new apartment, clearly calculating the immense wealth she now possessed. "Bethany, please, Donald," pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic, gravelly whine. "You have to help us. The bank took everything. They took the business, they took the house, they took the cars. We are staying in a cheap motel by the interstate. We have absolutely nothing left. We are completely bankrupt." Barbara let out a dramatic heaving sob, burying her face in her hands. "You cannot just leave us like this, Bethany. We are your family. We are your flesh and blood. We raised you. We provided for you. We just need a small loan. Just enough to get us back on our feet and secure a new place to live. You have millions now. You have that massive settlement from Trent. You can afford to help your own parents. You owe us that much after the stunt Abigail pulled at the gala. It completely ruined our social standing." They stood in the hallway weeping and begging, expecting Bethany to crumble under the weight of their familial guilt trip. They expected the compliant golden child to revert to her programming, to open her checkbook, and to prioritize their comfort over her own boundaries. Bethany stood perfectly still in the doorway. She listened to their frantic apologies, their manipulative tears, and their audacious demands for a bailout. She let them completely exhaust their supply of manufactured grief. She waited until the silence in the hallway became heavy, suffocating, and entirely absolute. When they finally stopped talking, looking up at her with desperate, pleading eyes, Bethany delivered the final fatal blow. She did not raise her voice. She did not yell or scream or cry. She simply looked at the two people who had actively encouraged her to endure severe physical abuse just to secure their commercial funding. She looked at the parents who had told her they would disown her if she ruined their wealthy lifestyle. She weaponized their own historical cruelty with surgical, devastating precision. "I don't have the money to support you," Bethany said, her voice a cold, unyielding wall of absolute steel. "You need to learn to be independent. Besides, I wouldn't want to stress you out." Donald and Barbara froze, the blood draining completely from their faces as they recognized the exact venomous words they had used against her in the hospital corridor months ago. The horrifying realization that their daughter was completely, irrevocably gone crashed over them in a tidal wave of permanent defeat. Before either of them could formulate a single syllable of protest, Bethany stepped back and firmly, securely, and permanently shut the heavy oak door directly in their faces. The thick deadbolt clicked into place with a loud, satisfying, and absolute finality. Bethany turned away from the heavy oak door, leaving our parents on the other side of that impenetrable physical and emotional barrier. She did not lean against the wood in relief. She did not shed a single tear of regret. She simply walked back into the sunlit expanse of her living room, picked up her coffee mug, and took a calm, measured sip. The transformation was absolute. The terrified woman I had met in that dingy diner 3 months ago had been completely overwritten by a sovereign, untouchable force. She was finally in total control of her own life. The bank, desperate to avoid federal scrutiny and catastrophic public relations fallout, had swiftly voided every single fraudulent loan Trent had opened in her name. Her credit was pristine, wiped entirely clean of the $250,000 debt that was meant to bury her. Furthermore, Veronica's aggressive civil litigation had successfully isolated and liquidated Trent's remaining clean, legitimate assets before the federal government could freeze them all. Bethany had walked away with a massive multi-million-dollar settlement. She was not just financially secure, she was fiercely independent, holding the absolute legal and monetary power to dictate her own future on her own terms. She had established a new foundation not just of wealth, but of unshakable self-respect. She was already using her settlement to fund domestic abuse advocacy groups, quietly funneling her resources into organizations that helped other women execute emergency extractions from dangerous marriages. She was turning Trent's blood money into a lifeline for others. 2 days later, the gray Seattle morning broke with a crisp, biting chill. My authorized leave had officially come to an end. It was time for me to rotate back into active duty. I stood in the spare bedroom of Bethany's high-rise apartment, methodically packing my tactical gear into my heavy olive-drab duffel bag. I rolled my uniforms with precise practiced efficiency, checking my deployment orders and securing my encrypted communication devices. The mission on domestic soil was officially complete. I had arrived to perform a simple emergency extraction and ended up executing a total systematic dismantling of a hostile financial network. More importantly, I had severed the toxic bloodline that had poisoned us both for over 3 decades. Bethany drove me to the airport in her newly purchased sensible and highly secure SUV. The ride was entirely different from the suffocating limousine journey I had taken with Trent. The air in the car was light, filled with the comfortable, easy silence of two people who completely understood and trusted one another. We did not need to rehash the trauma or analyze the downfall of our parents. The war was over, the battlefield had been cleared, and the victory was absolute. We pulled into the bustling departure terminal of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, intercom announcements, and rushing travelers surrounded us. I stepped out of the vehicle wearing my standard-issue combat fatigues, the heavy combat boots grounding me in the familiar, disciplined reality of my military life. Bethany walked with me toward the main security checkpoint. She did not look like the fragile, heavily made-up trophy wife Trent had tried to parade around high society. She wore a simple, elegant cashmere sweater and dark jeans, her face completely clear of heavy foundation, her natural beauty radiating a quiet, undeniable strength. We stopped just short of the security line, stepping out of the flow of hurried passengers. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The invisible wall that our parents had spent 30 years building between us, the toxic barrier that designated one of us as the golden child and the other as the disgraceful outcast, had been completely pulverized. We were no longer defined by their twisted conditional metrics of success. We stood there under the harsh fluorescent lights of the airport terminal as two independent battle-tested equals. Bethany closed the distance between us and wrapped her arms around my neck, pulling me into a fierce, bone-crushing hug. It was not the delicate, hesitant embrace of a polite society woman. It was the powerful, desperate grip of a survivor, acknowledging the soldier who had pulled her from the wreckage. "Thank you, Abby," she whispered, her voice thick with genuine emotion, but completely devoid of weakness. "You saved my life. I did not just survive because of you. I learned how to fight." I wrapped my arms around her back, returning the embrace with equal intensity. "You always had the strength inside you, Bethany," I replied quietly, stepping back and looking her dead in the eye. "You just needed a clear line of sight to use it. You are the one who shut the door on them. You are the one who took your empire back. Do not ever forget that." I reached down and hoisted the heavy canvas duffel bag onto my shoulder, adjusting the thick black strap across my chest. I offered her a slow, sharp, incredibly dangerous smirk. "But listen to me," I added, my tone shifting into a light, tactical drawl. "If you ever find yourself dealing with another arrogant billionaire who forgets his manners, or if you just need someone to break a few high society arms, you just say the word. We can always swap places one more time." Bethany let out a bright, genuine, and completely unrestrained laugh that echoed beautifully over the noise of the terminal. "I think I can handle my own battles from now on." She smiled brightly. "But I will keep the combat makeup on standby just in case." I gave her one final, respectful nod, turned on my heel, and merged into the dense crowd of departing travelers. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew exactly who I was leaving behind to guard the home front. A woman completely unbroken, entirely untouchable, and fiercely, finally free. As a soldier, I was trained to identify hostile threats and neutralize them. But in the civilian world, especially within families, the threats rarely wear enemy uniforms. They wear tailored suits, designer dresses, and the titles of husband or mother or father. The greatest lie society feeds us is that blood is an unbreakable bond demanding unconditional loyalty. But loyalty should never require you to sacrifice your physical safety, your financial security, or your sanity. Bethany spent years trapped in a gilded cage because she was conditioned to believe that enduring abuse was the price of our parents' love and social standing. Our parents actively chose their financial comfort over their daughter's life. The lesson here is simple and absolute: toxicity does not get a free pass just because it shares your DNA. True strength isn't about suffering in silence to keep the peace or maintaining a picture-perfect facade for the neighborhood. It is about drawing a rigid line in the sand and refusing to let anyone cross it. Sometimes the most powerful tactical maneuver you can execute is simply walking away. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep your abusers warm. You have the absolute right to reclaim your territory, rebuild your defenses, and permanently lock the door on anyone who brings a war into your home. Share your own stories in the comments below about extracting yourself from toxic relationships or cutting ties with family members who prioritize their own comfort over your well-being. If Bethany's journey to freedom resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of survival justice and taking back your power. Remember, your peace is worth protecting at all costs.